Chapter 1100. About 10 minutes later, a group of densely packed black dots flew over from the sky northeast of Marrow City. Finally, they stopped 3 kilometers away from Marrow City and stopped advancing. Captain Hart grabbed the binoculars and looked over, only to see mages wearing mage robes flying in the air. Heh, are these guys from the Canla Empire finally making a move? But do they think that these guys are enough? Captain Hart sneered. He turned to Nu and said, "Have our brothers greet these honorable magicians." "All right," Nunes replied straightforwardly. He turned around and gave the order. A moment later, more than 10 bright, pale green rays of light suddenly shot out from the city walls of Marrow City and shot towards the mages in the sky northeast of Marrow City. The mages had just stopped when they suddenly saw the dozen or so rays of light shooting towards them. They were instantly shocked. The magicians opened their arms in unison, and magic shields of various colors appeared in front of them, shielding them. The dozen or so rays of light had already collided with these magic shields in the blink of an eye, and exploded one after another. It was different from the explosion of the Frestec Chamber of Commerce's normal magic cannonballs. Although the explosion of these 10 faint blue lights wasn't small, there were visible faint blue ripples that spread in all directions after they exploded, instantly covering a large part of the surrounding space. Affected by these light green ripples, the entire space seemed to be stirred up like the surface of water, and became turbulent. The mages in the air suddenly discovered in shock that they seemed to have lost control of magical elements in an instant, and could not even maintain flight magic. Many mages simply fell from the sky. Fortunately, when they fell halfway and were about to hit the ground, they found that they had regained control of magical elements, and hurriedly stabilized their bodies. Otherwise, just this attack alone might have caused many mages to fall to their death. The mages in the air were still in shock. If quite a few magicians fell to their deaths under the attack of the Frestec Chamber of Commerce's guards, that would be a large joke. However, after carefully recalling what they had just experienced, the rest of the mages obediently landed on the ground. This was the first time these magicians felt that it was much more reassuring to stand on the ground than to fly in the air. When Captain Hart saw the reactions of the magicians in the distance through his binoculars, he couldn't help but laugh out loud. These magicians' biggest advantage in the past was that they could fly, while others couldn't. Now we have to let them know that flying at such a high altitude is not as safe as they think. Noyce, who had returned to Captain Hart's side, also laughed out loud. The magic theories of these fellows should have been eliminated a long time ago. However, the chairman has already publicly announced it countless times, yet no one is willing to believe it. We have to beat them into submission. These guys alone won't be able to defeat all the traditional magicians. Did you detect any reaction from the magisters? Captain Hart asked. We haven't detected it yet. However, even if there is a great magus among them, when they cast ordinary flight spells, their mana fluctuations won't differ too much. It's normal that we can't detect them, Noyce replied. It is indeed like this. Captain Hart nodded. All right, since the other side isn't willing to show themselves, we'll try to force them out. Order the magic tank brigade to prepare to attack. We'll carry out the first step of the plan. Yes. 10 minutes later, the Canla Empire magicians who had just recovered from the chaos suddenly found that the north gate of Marrow City was wide open. There were strange-looking magic cars that were like iron boxes charging out of Marrow City, quickly heading towards the first batch of reinforcements to the west of Marrow City. Half of these magicians immediately flew to the first batch of reinforcements, planning to stop these monsters that the Frestec Chamber of Commerce had named magic tanks in front of them. However, when these magicians flew up, there were several dozen rays of light that came from the walls of Marrow City, exploding in the sky above them. After the previous experience, they were very clear that the magical elements in the space enveloped by the ripples of light green radiance had already fallen into a completely uncontrollable state. If they still rashly flew up, they would fall back down again, and in the worst-case scenario, they might be seriously injured by the chaotic magical element. Helplessly, these magicians could only barely fly off the ground. They relied on flying at a low altitude to meet the magic tanks that had already driven out of Marrow City. However, before they could approach, the top half of the magic tanks turned 90 degrees and the thick steel pipes that were moving forward turned towards the magicians flying over. Seeing the black holes in the steel pipes, the magicians had a bad feeling in their hearts. As expected, after that, there were several dozen rays of different colored light that came out of the steel pipes, instantly appearing in front of them. The first to fly over were the 10 faint blue lights. The same color, the same reaction. After the faint blue light exploded, these magicians felt the magic elemental energy around them go out of control and they couldn't stop falling out of the sky. While they were falling out of the sky, there were several dozen fire-red and faint white lights that came flying over. Hong, 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 hong. There were dazzling flames that exploded in the air. The magicians in the air couldn't even control the magic elemental energy to fly, so it was impossible for them to set up magic shields to defend themselves. So after this series of terrifying explosions, there were only 10 magicians with the highest level and fastest reactions that escaped. The rest of the magicians weren't spared at all. Seeing such a result, the rest of the mages in the distance fell into a dead silence. They were the magicians that had received orders from the army headquarters to come back to attack Marrow City. They thought that with their large team of over 100 magicians, as well as the high-level magicians among them, they could easily take back Marrow City. But they never thought that before they could even reach Marrow City, in just a few clashes, they would lose close to half of them. The other magicians looked at the steel monster like magic tanks in the distance and Marrow City in the distance, feeling a chill fill their hearts. In any war before, the appearance of a large group of magicians was enough to decide the outcome of a battle. What really decided the outcome was always the quantity and quality of magicians on both sides. This was because compared to normal soldiers, magicians had an absolute advantage in terms of strength. But now that the new flyer guards hadn't sent out a single magician, these elite magicians that were hired by the Canla Empire's army headquarters had suffered heavy losses. At the same time, they hadn't been able to cause any damage to the new flyer guard. This result was something that no one had expected. The most important thing was that the abilities of the new flyer guards in the battle just now were just too terrifying. They didn't know what those faint blue lights were, but they could actually mess up the magic space around them. It made it so that these magicians couldn't control the magic elements as they normally did, which was equal to making them have zero abilities as magicians. On the contrary, the new flyer guards weren't restricted by this at all and could still release such terrifying attacks. With this reversal, it made these magicians seem like they couldn't even truss up a chicken in front of the new flyer guards. This was the first time they had seen this kind of situation in the Canla Empire's army headquarters, so it really shocked them. After being stunned for a bit, the surviving magicians couldn't help looking at the center of the team. There was their biggest reliance on this trip, as well as the strongest backing and trump card in their hearts. Feeling the gazes of the surrounding magicians, Archmagus Aphelion slightly knit his brows and asked Archmagus Reduca beside him, "Hey, Reduca, don't you feel that the attack we met just now was a bit similar to the characteristics of my magic domain?" Archmagus Reduca raised his head to look at the sky and closed his eyes to think for a moment before lightly nodding. "It's a bit similar, but it's not exactly the same. The magic elements in your magic domain are berserk, and can only be controlled by you. In the attack we met just now, it only made the magic elements in the surrounding magic space difficult to control, but it didn't have much offensive or destructive power. Simply put, it's just a small anti-magic domain. But isn't this a weapon that can be used against low-level magicians?" Archmagus Aphelion looked at the distant Marrow City and took a deep breath. I now suspect that Su-Yi clearly stole part of the characteristics of my magic domain from our previous battle and then transferred it to the military magic machines used by the Shinfei Chamber of Commerce. Archmagus Reduca looked at Archmagus Aphelion in shock. Why do you think so? Although Su-Yi's talent in magic is unquestionable, isn't it too inconceivable that he was able to figure out the characteristics of your magic domain after just one exchange? Archmagus Aphelion's face sank. You should have studied the strange metal component that Su-Yi left behind last time, right? Yes. I've been studying it recently, and the more I study it, the more inconceivable it is. New flyer. Or rather, how did Su-Yi research such a fine magic tool? Moreover, I can't even completely understand the principles behind this magic tool. If you listen to what Su-Yi said and read the Shinfei Magic Machine Industry Weekly, you might understand a bit more. Archmagus Aphelion said. You read it? Archmagus Reduca was stunned. He always thought that Archmagus Aphelion was very disdainful of Su-Yi and New Flyer, but he didn't think that he would be even more enthusiastic about reading the Shinfei Magic Machine Industry Weekly than him. It seemed like the fact that the two of them couldn't keep Su-Yi from fighting together last time was a huge blow to Aphelion. Yes, I seriously read all the Shinfei Magic Machine Industry Weekly that I could find, and then I found that I couldn't understand it. Chapter 1101. Su-Yi shook his head. I've seriously read that kid Su-Yi's article word by word. I can understand the meaning of each word, but I can't understand the meaning of the entire article at all. Archmagus Aphelion raised his hand and stopped Archmagus Reduca from speaking. But even if I can't understand, I'm very clear in my heart that the article is very reasonable. It definitely isn't some random nonsense that kid Su-Yi made up. Combined with the New Flyer's achievements these past few years, I have to admit that what Su-Yi said to us before might have some truth to it. What Su-Yi said? Archmagus Reduca was stunned. He finally remembered that when Su-Yi had fought with the two of them last time, he had told them that their magic theories were outdated. At that time, Archmagus Reduca didn't think much of it, but Archmagus Aphelion had scoffed at it. However, in less than half a year, Archmagus Aphelion's attitude had greatly changed. Not only did he take the initiative to study the new magic theory that Su-Yi had mentioned that he disdained before, he even admitted that his magic theory was outdated. Then you mean? Archmagus Reduca looked suspiciously at Archmagus Aphelion. Archmagus Reduca had always been a partner of the Canla Empire's military headquarters and would listen to their orders most of the time. When the news of the New Flyers Guards invading the Canla Empire and taking down Marrow City reached the military headquarters, it immediately caused a commotion. The military headquarters attached great importance to this. Not only did they send the most elite Magician Legion, they even asked Grand Magus Carmilla to personally make a move. Archmagus Aphelion was different from Archmagus Reduca. He had teamed up with Archmagus Reduca to deal with Su-Yi because of Marshal Sudirman's face. This time, when the military headquarters sent Archmagus Reduca to fight against the New Flyers Guards, he had received the news from somewhere and requested to join the battle. The military headquarters naturally wanted this, so they had the two of them come together and act as the core of the Magician Legion. However, they had just made contact with the New Flyers Guards, and Archmagus Aphelion had said these words to boost the enemy's prestige and destroy their own morale. This really was something that Archmagus Reduca never expected. Don't misunderstand, I'm just feeling emotional, there's no meaning. Archmagus Aphelion let out a soft sigh as his expression returned to normal. What we need to do now is very simple, we need to take care of the New Flyers Guards. It would be best if we could capture some of the Frestek Chamber of Commerce's guards and seize some of their military magic machines to study. That would be very helpful to us. Yes, that's what the military thinks as well. Leduca nodded. Archmagus Ophelion nodded. In the battle with the Kingdom of Ruhr last time, the magic cannons and other military magic machines of the Empire had a clear difference compared to the New Flyers' military magic machines. The military headquarters were very dissatisfied with this, so we need to get a new batch of New Flyers' military magic machines to study. Archmagus Ophelion suddenly gave a laugh of ridicule. Reduca, if you read the Shinfei Magic Machine Industry Weekly, you wouldn't be saying this. That kid Su-E had said several years ago that the military magic machines weren't things that could be made just by copying them. This was related to the entire magic machine industry. Without enough technology as a foundation, it is impossible to make something that can compete with the New Flyers' military magic machines. Archmagus Reduca looked at Archmagus Ophelion with knit brows. Ophelion, why do I feel that? You're leaning more and more towards the New Flyer? I'm just leaning towards the truth. Archmagus Ophelion softly replied. Of course, this doesn't stop me from being a citizen of the Canla Empire. Alright, stop wasting words, let's go. Based on the situation just now, the normal magicians won't be of any use. How about we bring the great magicians to try first? I'm also thinking the same thing. Archmagus Reduca nodded in agreement before heading off to pick people. Archmagus Reduca was one of the 9 great Archmagi of the Canla Empire. He was also the honorary commander of the Magician Corps under the military headquarters, so he had a high prestige in the hearts of the magicians under the military headquarters. Under his orders, the 13 great magicians that came this time were quickly picked out. They formed a small team with him and Archmagus Ophelion, flying towards Marrow City. The other magicians were all left behind and retreated a bit, waiting for the other reinforcements from the military headquarters. The small team of magicians that included 2 great archmages and 13 great magicians quickly attracted the attention of the New Flyer Guard. They had just flown a bit when several dozen light green rays of light shot out from the city walls of Marrow City. However, this time, the light green ripples caused by the light green rays of light didn't have much of an effect on the 15 magicians. They continued to stably fly towards Marrow City at high speed. It looks like the big fishes have finally made their move. Captain Hart revealed a faint smile on the city walls. Nunes passed down the order to prepare the second part of the plan. Yes. Countless specks of weak light suddenly flew out of Marrow City. It was like a starry sky had suddenly risen from the city walls. It was very beautiful. However, when this scene fell into the eyes of Archmagus Ophelion and Archmagus Reduca, it instantly put them on guard. These specks of light, they had seen them before when they fought Su-E. At that time, Su-E had used the light from these strange metal parts to form a strange magic domain. Not only had he easily escaped from the suppression of the 2 of them, he had even passed through the magic suppression array of Wimbledon City, which had a very strange effect. When Archmagus Reduca was chasing the New Flyers' magic airship team, he had also encountered a similar situation. But the goal of those magic airships was to stop him from using forbidden spells. Although they were both trying to escape, the specific principles behind it were probably very different. Now that the New Flyer Guards in Marrow City had released these things again, it was unknown what goal they had. Everyone be careful at all times. Archmagus Reduca had just given this reminder to the 13 great magicians beside him when he saw the 2 great magicians flying in front suddenly hit something and fly back. The several great magicians behind the 2 of them hurriedly acted at the same time to help them regain their footing. Then, they looked forward in astonishment, only to see that in the void, there were streaks of lightning flickering with extraordinary colors that were gradually fading away. Archmagus Ophelion and Archmagus Reduca looked at each other in surprise at the same time. This scene was clearly the same as when the magic suppression array in Wimbledon City was activated. It can't be that this kid Su-E has only touched the magic suppression array once and he already knows the principle behind it and can even imitate it, right? Archmagus Ophelion couldn't help saying with wide eyes. That's impossible. Archmagus Reduca immediately shook his head to deny this guess. The magic suppression array in Wimbledon City was carefully made by countless arch-magi over several hundred years. Even if Su Yi's talent is strong enough to understand it, it wouldn't be easy for him to imitate it. It's even more impossible for him to set it up outside Marrow City in such a short period of time. That's right. Archmagus Ophelion was silent for a bit before flying forward. He sent out a trace of magic, and felt that there was a change in the magic space in front of him. The feeling it gave him was very similar to the magic space affected by the magic suppression array in Wimbledon City. After thinking about it, his magic wildly surged, and his unique magic domain was activated, attacking the magic space in front of him. When his magical domain came into contact with that abnormal mana space, the large area of mana space in front of him immediately became like a pot of boiling oil that had been poured into a basin of water. The magical elements within it became extremely violent. Archmagus Ophelion was caught off guard, and was stirred up by the wild magic elemental energy, almost causing him to lose control of his magic. It was a good thing that his control of magic had already reached the realm of being able to control it as he wished. Once he felt that something was wrong, he immediately withdrew his magic. Archmagus Reduca and the other 13 great mages weren't ordinary people, so they naturally easily sensed the change in the magic space in front of them. Their expressions immediately changed. The guards of New Flyer were actually able to create such a terrifying magic space seal with a casual move. This was far beyond their expectations. What do we do now? The other 13 great mages all looked at Archmagus Reduca. Archmagus Reduca didn't say anything. He raised his head and released his magic, probing in all directions. After a moment, his magic had already probed all the space within a radius of 2 kilometers with him as the center. The results showed that there were no problems in other directions, but there was an arc of strange magic space in front of them that almost covered all of Marrow City. It was clearly to stop them from approaching Marrow City. We don't have any good ideas for now. Everyone, use your full strength and break this strange magic shield in front of us. Archmagus Reduca thought about it and said. Archmagus Reduca thought about it before saying, as long as we break this barrier, I believe that the New Flyer guards of Marrow City won't be able to stop us. All right. The other great mages all agreed. When everyone was about to make a move, a great magician suddenly pointed to the sky to the right in front of them in surprise. Everyone looked up and saw that in the sky to the south of Marrow City, there was a team of several dozen magic airships flying over like a dark cloud. Everyone's eyes fell onto the magic airships, and they saw countless dazzling milky white lights coming out of each magic airship, instantly appearing in front of everyone. Feeling the terrifying power of these lights, not only the 13 great magicians, even Archmagus Ophelion and Archmagus Reduca's expressions changed. Chapter 1102. It was already too late to dodge, so Archmagus Ophelion, Archmagus Reduca, and the other 13 great magicians could only release magic shields with all their might, covering themselves in them. The dozens of milky white rays of light collided with the magic shield, but the explosion wasn't as intense as everyone had expected. In fact, even the sound of the collision was very soft. They could only hear dozens of soft pops that sounded like balloons bursting. Afterward, the dozens of milky white rays of light scattered into milky white dots that filled the sky, enveloping a large area of the surrounding space. This is bad. Just as Archmagus Ophelion and Archmagus Reduca had time to shout, they immediately felt the surrounding mana space become extremely unstable. With their powerful magic power, it was actually very hard for them to maintain their magic shield. As for the other 13 great magicians who were weaker than them, they were swaying in the air. Not to mention maintaining their magic shields, It was a bit hard for them to maintain their magic shields in the air. It was very clear that the attack they suffered this time was similar to the light blue rays of light that the new Flyers' magic tanks fired from the walls of Marrow City. It was an attack that could greatly disrupt the magic space. This kind of attack was something that the new Flyer had specially developed for magicians because normal soldiers couldn't even sense the magic elemental energy in the magic space, not to mention being affected by the disruption of the magic space. But the difference was that the attack of the several dozen rays of light from the magic airships was clearly on a higher level. In the previous attack, the great mages in the team were able to maintain a relatively relaxed state without being affected. But now, even Archmage Aphelion and Archmage Reduca were greatly affected by this attack. It could be seen how terrifying the power of this attack was. Aphelion, it seems like your guess before was wrong. The new Flyer isn't completely based on your magic domain. At least when facing your magic domain, I don't feel that it's that hard. Archmagus Reduca said with a frown. Archmagus Aphelion's face sunk as he looked at the several dozen magic airships in the sky with eyes filled with doubt. Hearing Archmagus Reduca's words, he couldn't help shaking his head. I don't know. Perhaps that kid Sue has his own understanding, or perhaps the Frestec Chamber of Commerce has developed something that belongs to them during this time. In short, our current situation isn't very good. Let's think of a way to solve the problem in front of us. Archmage Reduca nodded and took a deep breath. He mobilized his mana with all his might, trying to use the characteristics of his magic domain to stabilize the chaotic magic space around him. However, as soon as he moved, the magic airships moved again. This time, these magic airships didn't shoot out milky white light like before, rather there were several dozen flames that flew out. The faces of the 15 mages, including the 2 magisters, changed dramatically when they saw this. There was no need to use mana to detect them. Just by looking at them, one could see the terrifying power contained within those dozens of flames. But because of the attack just now, the magic space around them had become chaotic, so they couldn't control the magic elemental energy at all. Naturally, they couldn't maintain a complete magic shield like before. If they lost the protection of the magic shield, the defenses of these magicians wouldn't be stronger than normal people. Under such a terrifying attack, if they couldn't dodge it, there was only death. These magic airships attacked very quickly. As soon as they came out of the magic airships, they arrived in front of the magicians in the blink of an eye. At this time, the only ones who could resist were the 2 Archmagi. Archmagus Aphelion and Archmagus Reduca didn't dare hold back at all. They released all their magic and released their magic domains at the same time, covering the 13 great magicians around them. Although the characteristics of their magic domains were different, with the tacit understanding between the 2 of them, when they released their magic domains, the surrounding magic space was under their control again. The chaotic magic space was once again under their control. At this time, those dozens of flames with terrifying might were already flying at them. The 2 great magi didn't think too much as they once again mobilized all their magic power. They actually managed to gather all the magic elements in the mana space that they had managed to control with great difficulty. They opened 2 huge magic shields, protecting the 2 of them and the other 13 great magi behind them. Hong, 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 hong. This time, the attack wasn't as silent as the previous one. Instead, dozens of bright balls of fire instantly exploded in the air, turning the entire sky into a bright red color. The violent explosion spread far and wide, causing the first batch of reinforcements sent by the governor's manor of the southwest province and the remaining great mages to tremble in fear. Although they were confident in the 2 incomparably respected Archmagi and the 13 powerful great magicians, the attacks of the new Flyers' magic airships were just too terrifying, so they couldn't help feeling worried. About a minute later, the explosions stopped completely, and the flames faded away. Gradually, more than 10 figures were still floating in the air. The other people from the Canla Empire looked over, and seeing that there were exactly 15 figures, they let out a sigh of relief. It was a good thing that no matter how terrifying the attacks of the new Flyers' magic airships were, they couldn't do anything to the incomparably powerful Arch-Magi. Subconsciously, they had already ignored the other 13 great mages. However, hearing the cheers from the army and the magicians who stayed behind, Archmagus Ophelion and Archmagus Reduca looked at each other before revealing bitter smiles at the same time. Although they had indeed blocked the terrifying attack just now and were still able to maintain a complete magic shield, which seemed easy at first glance, they had in fact consumed a large amount of mana just to use the magical domain to regain control of the surrounding mana space. And in order to block those terrifying attacks, their magic consumption had become even more terrifying. In just a bit of effort, the magic that seemed bottomless to the other magicians had been reduced by close to a third. If this happened a few more times, they didn't have the confidence to block it again. Archmagus Reduca had a thought before giving a sigh. He turned to the other 13 great magicians and said, "All right, you can all go back." The other 13 great magicians were all stunned. Archmagus Reduca's words meant that they were useless here? But thinking about it, they felt that Archmagus Reduca's thoughts weren't wrong at all. In the attack just now, they had already used all their strength to stabilize themselves in the air. And in the following attacks, if it wasn't for the 2 Arch-Magi protecting them, even if they didn't explode, they would have been close to death. Thus, in all seriousness, not only would they not be of any use by staying here, they would instead become a burden to the 2 mages, forcing them to expend more energy and mana to protect them. Thinking of this, the hearts of the other 13 great magicians dimmed. They were all respected great magicians. Even in the Canla Empire, any one of them would be respected by tens of thousands of people. They were at the top of the pyramid of magicians, but now they had become a burden. But no matter how unwilling they were, they could only accept the facts in front of them. Not to mention that the 2 honored Arch-Magi were in front of them, it wasn't their turn to feel disappointed. Thus, the 13 great magicians could only nod in agreement and turn to leave. But the new Flyers' magic airships didn't stop at all. When they were about to move, there was another attack. This attack was a combination of the previous 2 attacks. First there were several dozen milky white rays of light that shot out, followed by several dozen fire-red rays of light. "Humph! Do you want to keep all of us here?" Archmagus Ophagon gave a cold snort. He released all his magic and expanded his magic domain ahead of time, controlling the magic space in front of him and above him. "We'll cover you, all of you retreat first." Archmagus Reduca waved his hand at the 13 great magicians before turning to learn from Archmagus Ophagon, using his magic domain ahead of time to control the magic space. After the previous attacks, they had some experience. They knew that they had to control the magic space around them before the milky white rays of light destroyed it, so they could deal with the next attack. As expected, after a while, the first several dozen milky white rays of light collided with Archmagus Ophagon's magic domain and exploded just like before. Then Archmagus Ophagon felt that his magic domain had suffered a serious attack, which made his control over his magic domain much weaker. This fact made him very surprised. As a magical domain that could only be mastered by Archmage-level mages, it had already surpassed the level of understanding and mastery of other mages. Normally speaking, unless they met another Archmagus, it would be possible for their magic domain to become unstable. But now New Flyer clearly didn't send out a single magician, not to mention an Archmagus. Just the attacks of the magic airships had the power of an Archmagus, which was very terrifying. Hong, 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 hong. The several dozen flames behind the milky white rays of light hit the magic shield that Archmagus Ophagon had prepared ahead of time, creating a series of explosions. Archmagus Ophagon felt that his magic power had decreased with each explosion, so he knew that he couldn't keep going like this. Reduca, we can't keep taking hits like this, how about… Archmage Aphelion turned his head to Archmage Reduca and stopped halfway through his sentence. He was surprised to see that the other 13 great magicians who had listened to their orders to withdraw were all still behind them at this moment, and hadn't withdrawn at all. Archmagus Ophagon knit his brows. When he was about to ask, one of the great magicians swallowed a mouthful of saliva and said with an ugly expression, "Your Excellencies, we can't leave." Chapter 1103. Can't get out. Archmage Ophagon was stunned. What do you mean? Another great mage who was the furthest away from Archmage Aphelion reached out his hand and flicked the air in front of him. Streaks of lightning flashing with strange colors appeared out of thin air and quickly spread out. In an instant, it had already covered an area of more than 10 square meters in the air. Archmagus Ophagon's expression changed. Magic Forbidden Domain? Shouldn't this be in front of Marrow City? Why is it behind us? Hong, 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 hong. There was another series of explosions, but it was Archmagus Reduca blocking another wave of attacks from the new flyer magic airships. Who? Ophagon, I just checked again, and this magic forbidden domain changed its range when we were focused on the magic airship. Now it's covering us in all directions. It seems like those fellows from New Flyer had already planned this, using this trap to lure us in. Archmagus Reduca said in a panting voice. How is this possible? The anti-magic domain array takes a long time to lay down. It's already good that those fellows from the Frestec Chamber of Commerce could defend Beauty City. How could they change the range in such a short period of time in the middle of a battle and even accurately surround us? Archmagus Ophagon said in a loud voice with a look of disbelief. This is the truth. Archmagus Reduca flew up with a sunken face and reached out a finger. There was a flash of magic at the tip of his finger before he poked out. The void that seemed very normal, when it came into contact with Archmagus Reduca's finger, it was like a giant stone had been thrown into a calm lake. Countless different colored lightning bolts appeared in the sky and wildly flashed in all directions, covering the entire sky in just a moment. Looking up, one would discover that these bolts of lightning had formed a semicircular cover in the air, extending all the way down to cover an enormous space about 50 meters tall and nearly 100 meters in diameter. It was just enough to cover the 15 mages, including the 2 archmages. Archmagus Aphelion looked around and his expression greatly changed. Reduca, are you certain that this barrier is the same as the magic forbidden domain in Wimbledon City? No. Archmagus Reduca floated down and shook his head. It's clearly not the same. Once the magic forbidden domain in Wimbledon City is activated, it will block all magic. Whether it is from the inside to the outside or from the outside to the inside, it will block all magic. As for the one around us, it shouldn't be called a magic forbidden domain, rather it's a magic cage prepared for us. We can't go out, but the attacks from outside can still come in. Look. Archmagus Ophagon knit his brows. He gathered all his magic and released his magic shield, blocking the attacks of New Flyer's magic airships. But this time, his expression was not as relaxed as it was before. After withstanding 3 attacks, he realized that half of his mana had been depleted. He's, is there a way to get out? Archmagus Ophagon asked. Archmagus Reduca was silent for a bit before saying with a nod, I'll try with them. You block the other side's attacks first and buy us some time. Of course, if you can't hold on, it's my turn. Archmagus Ophagon let out a sigh of relief. There's no problem for now. But if these fellows keep attacking like this, I won't be able to hold on for long. I know. Archmagus Reduca patted Archmagus Ophagon's shoulder before waving his hand at the other 13 great magicians. They gathered around the strange magic cage and began studying it. Archmagus Aphelion watched as the magic airships in the sky released several dozen more flames. He took a deep breath and focused his mind, as he began using all his magic. Hong, 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 hong. The explosions in the air didn't stop, but when they fell into different people's ears, they had different reactions. The first batch of reinforcements from the southwest province outside the city were filled with fear. Although the remaining magicians were worried, they weren't that worried because they knew that there were 2 archmagi inside, so it was impossible for there to be a problem. As for the people on the New Flyers side in Marrow City, they weren't worried at all, but they were a bit nervous. This wasn't New Flyers' first time facing an archmagus-level enemy. 8 years ago, New Flyer had been ambushed by 2 archmagi and killed one of them, making New Flyer famous. But that time was different from this time. That time it was Archmagus Levin Hasek seeking his own death, running to the New Flyer headquarters to fall into a trap and die. But this time it was New Flyer who took the initiative to attack, setting up a trap in the Kanla Empire to deal with an Archmagus. The difficulty of the two was completely different. Although this fellow had practiced countless times before, each Archmagus was different from the others. They were all super experts that couldn't be estimated. In the eyes of most people, it was almost impossible to kill an Archmage. Although everything was going smoothly now, the other side had 2 powerful Archmagi, so it was hard to predict what would happen. So even if the other side's big fish were being beaten, Captain Hart didn't dare relax at all. He kept in contact with the magic airships in the sky. There's still half of the ammunition left. If we maintain the current attack frequency and strength, it will be used up in 17 minutes. Hearing the news from the magic airships, Captain Hart thought for a bit before grabbing another magic communicator. The magic tanks listened to my orders, immediately set off towards the Kanla Empire's reinforcements. Drive the enemy 5 kilometers away from Marrow City and don't let them enter this range. If the operation fails, retreat to the southwest as quickly as possible. There can't be any delays. Captain, does this mean we don't care about you? Stop wasting words, listen to my orders. Yes. Captain Hart hung up the magic communicator before turning to say to Nolans, have the logistics team load some ammunition and head out of the city from the south gate. Prepare to support the magic airship. After saying this, he picked up the first magic communicator and connected to the magic airship. Magic airships, arrange the order and head out to the south gate to replenish the ammunition. But during this time, you have to keep suppressing the other side's great magicians and archmagi. You can't let them relax at all, understood? Understood. Wilrod, lead the Elven Guard team into the city. You have to maintain the stability of the city. If you see anything strange, don't be polite, do you understand? Understood. Alright, go. The captain of the Elven Guard squad, Wilrod, immediately led the other 2 Elven Guards down the city wall. After a while, the Elven Guards disappeared from Marrow City like shadows. After giving this order, Captain Hart let out a sigh of relief. He turned to look at the great magicians and the 2 arch-magi being bombarded by the magic airships in the distance. Deciding this operation, deciding this battle, even deciding the fate of New Flyer and the Kanla Empire, even deciding the future development of the signs, it all depended on this confrontation. If they succeeded, New Flyer's future development would be bright. If they failed, the consequences would be hard to predict. Thinking of this, the experienced Captain Hart couldn't help feeling nervous. Of course, compared to Captain Hart, the ones who were the most nervous were the 2 arch-magi and the 13 great magicians in the center. If they failed, it would be related to their lives, which was more important than anything else. However, even after Archmagus Reduca and the other 13 great magicians studied it for a while, they still couldn't understand the principle of the strange magic barrier around them, not to mention breaking it and dragging them out of this cage. Although they didn't know why, but the attacks of the New Flyers' magic airships were a bit weaker than before. Sensing that Archmagus Aphelian's magic domain was taking effect bit by bit, Archmagus Reduca knew that he wouldn't be able to hold on much longer. "Alright, let me do it." Archmagus Reduca gave a sigh before flying forward to speak to Archmagus Aphelion. "This thing's characteristics are a bit similar to your magic domain, so it should be easier for you to study it." Archmagus Aphelion looked at Archmagus Reduca, knowing that he was just looking for an excuse. However, he knew that he didn't have enough magic, and if he didn't change people, he might not even be able to take 3 waves of attack. So he nodded and changed places with Archmagus Reduca. Flying to the side of the great magicians, he asked them a few questions. After understanding the progress of their research, Archmagus Aphelion slightly knit his brows. There wasn't enough time and the environment wasn't good, so they didn't have enough magic materials. They didn't have enough conditions to study this strange magic barrier bit by bit, so naturally they couldn't break it. Thinking of this, Archmage Aphelion waved his hand to signal the other 13 great mages to retreat. After concentrating for a moment, he reached out with both hands and all the remaining mana in his body crazily surged. He then reached out with both hands and black ripples that represented spatial cracks circled around them as he probed the strange magic barrier. Since it was impossible to break it with research, he would use brute force to break it. Chapter 1104. Countless different colored ripples suddenly appeared around Archmage Aphelion's hands. It was as if a dazzling silk had sprouted from his hands. In an instant it had already spread to the sky and the surrounding void, extending all the way down to the ground. If it was said that Archmage Reduca and Archmage Aphelion had only used their magic to detect the approximate size and shape of the magic cage that was blocking their path, then now, through these strange flickering patterns, the magic cage was completely displayed in front of everyone. Looking around, the magic cage really did cover the 2 archmages and the 13 other great mages from top to bottom, left to right and all directions. Although the flickering patterns no longer appeared after extending to the ground, Archmage Aphelion didn't need to specifically investigate to be certain that the magic cage that the new flyer guards had meticulously built definitely wouldn't have such a large hole in the ground. It was definitely a complete sphere that sealed off all directions and didn't give them a chance to break out. Of course, Archmage Aphelion didn't have any thoughts of trickery right now. He just wanted to rely on his powerful magic and understanding of magic to forcibly break out of this magic cage. Although this magic cage's characteristics were a bit stronger than the anti-magic domain array in Wimbledon City, it was still a magic barrier-type magic array that had been set up temporarily. Whether it was strength or thickness, it was far inferior to the anti-magic domain array in Wimbledon City. However, when the magic released by Archmage Aphelion's hands collided with the abnormal magic space within the magic cage, the changes that occurred greatly exceeded his expectations. Archmage Aphelion's plan was to use his powerful magic to directly interfere with this magic space and restore it to its normal state. This was equivalent to creating a hole in the magic cage and allowing everyone trapped inside to escape through this hole. If his target was the anti-magic domain array in Wimbledon City, he definitely wouldn't do this. This was because the anti-magic domain array in Wimbledon City was built by countless powerful mages of the Canla Empire over the past few hundred years. Its strength was based on the incomparably powerful magic array in the palace. That magic array would have an endless supply of magic crystals at all times, and there would be at least 5 great mages guarding it. If Archmage Aphelion wanted to use this method to forcibly remove the restrictions of the anti-magic domain array, it was equivalent to directly going against the giant magic array that had been built by countless mages for hundreds of years and the 5 great mages guarding it. Even if he was an incomparably powerful archmage, he still didn't have any chance of winning. However, The magic cage that trapped them this time was clearly set up temporarily and didn't have such terrifying conditions. Therefore, he had enough confidence to forcibly break it. However, when he released his magic power, he found that it hit thin air. This abnormal magic space was the same as other magic spaces. It was filled with magic elements, and because of the abnormality of the magic space, it could be easily sensed. However, no matter how much Archmage Auphalion urged his mana, the magic elements were not affected at all. They continued to flow chaotically, as if Archmage Auphalion's enormous mana that most mages couldn't compare to didn't exist. Archmage Auphalion had been exposed to magic since he was 6 years old. It had already been close to 70 years. He had been in contact with the magic elements in the space every day and even communicated with them. This was the first time he had encountered a situation where the magic elements were not affected by his magic power. Archmage Auphalion tried to change the speed and intensity of his magic power output, but the magic elements continued to move as they wished and were not affected at all. After experimenting for a while and seeing that there was no effect, Archmage Auphalion pulled his hands back and left the strange magic space. He flipped his right hand and a small fireball appeared in his palm. This was only a normal fireball spell, but it proved that there was no problem with Archmage Auphalion's magic power. The only problem was that strange magic space. After thinking for a bit, Archmage Auphalion condensed magic power in his right hand and instantly brought a small space in front of him into his special magic domain. He then carefully controlled his magic power and let the magic domain slowly approach the strange magic space in front of him. Just as the edge of the magic domain touched the magic space, Archmage Auphalion suddenly felt that the magic elements at the edge of the magic domain he controlled were instantly affected by the magic space. The magic elements in the space were instantly out of his control. A magic domain was an extremely profound topic for an archmage. It represented a mage's ultimate control over the magic elements in the magic space. But now, with just a light touch, Archmage Auphalion immediately lost control of one of the magic domains. This kind of situation could only happen when another archmage used their higher attainments in the magic domain to suppress it. It was the first time Archmage Auphalion had seen a strange magic space attack him and cause him to lose control. Oh, because he lost control of the magic domain, Archmage Auphalion also lost control of his magic. There was a backlash from the magic, and he suffered quite a bit of internal injuries. Seeing Archmage Auphalion suddenly spit out blood, the 13 great magicians around him were shocked. "Your Excellency Auphalion, are you all right?" A great magician flew over to support Archmage Auphalion as he asked this in a worried voice. Archmagus Reduca, who had just blocked another wave of attacks from the new Flyer's magic airships, was also shocked. He couldn't help asking, "Auphalion, can you still hold on? How about you rest a bit before trying again?" Archmage Auphalion shook his head. "There's no time for me to rest now." After saying this, he looked at the several dozen magic airships floating in the sky and gave a bitter laugh. "I never thought that with 2 arch-magi working together, we would actually be forced into this situation by the new Flyer. No one would believe it if this was said." Archmagus Reduca also shook his head with a bitter smile. "This new Flyer has been creating miracles since they appeared, so I'm not surprised that they can reach this point. You have to know that just a few days ago..." Archmagus Reduca opened his mouth before shaking his head with a sigh. "Forget it, now isn't the time to talk about this. Auphalion, I should be able to block no more than 5 attacks, how about you?" The expressions of the 13 great magicians changed. Archmagus Reduca could only block no more than 5 attacks, but the new Flyer's attacks didn't seem to be weakening at all. After these 5 attacks, they wouldn't be able to leave, nor would they be able to resist. Could it be that they could only wait for death? Archmagus Auphalion knit his brows in thought before taking a deep breath, like he had made his decision. "Reduca, hold on a bit longer. Everyone else, come over. Archmagus Ophelion waved his hand at the other 13 great magicians, having them come over. Seeing his actions, Reduca raised a brow and said in a surprised voice, Ophelion, could it be that you want to? That is very dangerous, you. There's no other way, we can only give it a try. Archmagus Ophelion waved his hand before turning to the other 13 great magicians and saying with a serious look, Everyone, I need to borrow your strength to give it a try. The other 13 great magicians looked at each other before nodding. Your Excellency Ophelion, please give the order. That's right, we're already at this point, there's nothing to worry about. Just tell us what you want to do. Yes. Please guide us. Archmagus Ophelion gave a happy nod before raising his hands again. Relax, don't have any thoughts of resisting. After saying this, Archmagus Ophelion mobilized his magic power and opened his magic domain, enveloping the surrounding 13 great magicians. The other 13 great magicians felt the change in the surrounding magic power and reflexively wanted to mobilize their magic power to resist, but they immediately thought of what Archmagus Ophelion had just said and relaxed their minds, allowing the magic domain to envelop them. Very good, now start mobilizing the magic power in your bodies. Follow my guidance and gather together. With Archmagus Ophelion's explanation, the magic power of the other 13 great magicians was released from their bodies and gradually gathered together under the influence of the magic domain. Under normal circumstances, due to the differences in magic power between different magicians, if two different magicians' magic power came into contact with each other, it would most of the time lead to very serious consequences. It was very dangerous for the powerful magic power of 13 different great magicians to be gathered together. This was because it was very likely that the magic power of these 13 great magicians would collide head-on and the 13 great magicians would suffer a serious magic backlash. But now, under the guidance of Archmagus Ophelion's magic domain, these 13 different magic powers had completely gathered together. Under the guidance of Archmagus Ophelion's magic power, they had almost merged into one. After finishing these preparations, Archmagus Ophelion began to mobilize this abnormally powerful magic power. It could even be called terrifying magic power to crazily condense the magic elements in the surrounding space and crazily compress them. As more and more magic elements gathered in the small space, the space in front of Archmagus Ophelion began to change little by little. In the beginning, it was only the space that began to distort. Then, little by little, it was as if everything was falling into this space. Even light was falling in. It looked even more terrifying than a spatial crack caused by ordinary spatial magic. In the end, this space even seemed to have solidified into a sphere that was suspended in the air, as if it came from another world. The other 13 great magicians all held their breaths as they nervously looked at this strange black sphere. They could feel that this black sphere contained an incomparably terrifying power. Once it was released, not to mention destroying the heavens and earth, even space itself would be shattered. It was clear that Archmagus Ophelion had created this strange black sphere in order to seal off their escape route in this magic cage. But would it work? Chapter 1105. When Archmagus Ophelion was prepared to push the black ball that contained incomparably terrifying power into the strange magic space of the magic cage, there was a long sigh that came from the sky behind them. Archmagus Ophelion, if I was you, I wouldn't choose to do this. Archmagus Ophelion stopped in surprise. He and the other 13 great magicians all turned to look in the direction of the voice. There was a figure that slowly fell down from the sky, stopping around 500 meters away from the magic cage. Everyone looked into the distance and immediately recognized the identity of the person who had suddenly appeared. Su-yi, the New Flyers chairman. His image often appeared in the newspapers of various countries and had already spread through the signs. Even the normal citizens could recognize him, not to mention these peak magicians. Not to mention that Archmagus Offarian and Archmagus Reduca had fought with Sui before, so Sui had left a deep impression on them, so they recognized him with a single glance. Chairman Su? You're here now, are you here to laugh at me and Reduca? Archmagus Offarian gave a cold laugh, but his heart sunk. In order to deal with this situation, he and Archmagus Reduca had already used up most of their magic. Even in a normal situation, the two of them couldn't do anything to Sui, not to mention in this situation. Even if Sui made a move, the two of them didn't dare guarantee that they wouldn't have a chance to live. Sui didn't even need to make a move. He just needed to stop them from destroying the magic cage, and let those damn magic airships bombard them, and they wouldn't be able to hold on at all. No, I just don't want you, Archmagus Reduca, and these 13 important great magicians to be buried here. Sui said while shaking his head. You don't want us to be buried here? Archmagus Offarian looked at Sui with wide eyes and couldn't help saying with a laugh, if you don't want to kill us, why would you spend so much effort to set up this trap to lure us in? My goal isn't to take your lives. In my opinion, you, Archmagus Reduca, and these 13 great magicians are all very precious talents. It would be a pity to lose any one of you, so I never planned on killing you. Then why did you spend so much effort? Archmagus Offarian said with a cold snort, is it just to trap us for fun? Of course not. Actually, I only had one goal, and that was to prove to everyone that mages were no longer the key to victory on the battlefield. Even archmages weren't enough. Or to put it more bluntly, I want all magicians to leave the battlefield to return to their positions. Suyizas said with a serious voices. Magus Offarian Magus Magician to Magus to Offarians Tuzazas, a confused look. Chairman Su, you. What do you mean? Archmagus Reduca couldn't help knitting his brows as he asked this. Sui was silent for a moment before flying over. With a wave of his hand, the magic cage that had been covered in ripples of light due to Archmagus Offarian's magic suddenly disappeared. A great magician was stunned for a moment before tentatively reaching out with his hand. He released a trace of magic to investigate that strange magic space, but he found that the magic space had already returned to normal. He carefully flew over and found that he wasn't obstructed at all. He could fly freely in the air as usual. In an instant, the feeling of regaining his freedom swept through his body, rousing his spirit. Seeing this great magician's actions, the other 12 great magicians also began to move, flying in different directions. A moment later, it was proven that the strange magic cage that had shrouded them earlier had really disappeared. They were no longer confined to this small space like they were before. This fact made all the great magicians extremely happy. In that kind of situation, not to mention the 13 great magicians being helpless, even the 2 incomparably respected great magicians were powerless. Although Archmagus Offarian had used a novel magic that they had never thought of before, gathering all of their magic together. It seemed to have a terrifying power that could break this stalemate, but no one could guarantee 100% success rate. Moreover, from what Sui had said when he suddenly appeared, even if Archmagus Offarian had done it, he might not have succeeded. It might even lead to terrifying consequences. Therefore, from the situation just now, they had already fallen into a desperate situation. Now that the magic cage had been removed by Sui with a wave of his hand, everyone had regained their freedom. Naturally, the sky was clear and boundless. Archmagus Offarian and Archmagus Reduca weren't as relaxed as the 13 great magicians. On the contrary, their brows were tightly knit as they looked at Sui with a doubtful expression. Chairman Su, what do you want to do? Archmagus Offarian asked in a deep voice. I've already told you my goal. Sui replied. Actually, I spent all this effort to set up this trap to target the Arch-Magi of the Kanla Empire, but I never thought that it would be the 2 of you. Archmagus Offarian gave a cold snort, Reduca is an arch-magus specially hired by the Empire's army headquarters. Of course he would come. With my relationship with Marshal Sudiman, of course I would come. You should have seen this last time. Sui nodded to show he understood. The other thing I didn't expect was that Your Excellency Offarian actually grasped such a terrifying method of using magic. It really surpassed my plans and I had to come out to stop you. Arch-Magus Offarian looked up slightly and said with a proud look, "What? You think that your trap can't stop me and your laughable magic airships can't do anything to us, so you decided to make a move yourself." Sui revealed a faint smile. "Your Excellency Offarian, do you think that if I went all out, what are the chances of you and Arch-Magus Reduca surviving?" Arch-Magus Offarian's expression changed. Although he was still arrogant in front of Sui, he was very clear in his heart that he had almost run out of magic. If Sui went all out, with his power as an arch-magus and his strong understanding of magic, even if he didn't use all his life-saving skills, Sui would still be holding back. In the end, the chances of escaping from Sui's hands would be very low. Arch-Magus Offarian didn't say anything, but Arch-Magus Reduca thought for a bit before saying with a nod, "You're right, my magic has almost been used up. If you go all out, I might not be able to escape at all." After saying this, Arch-Magus Reduca gave a bitter laugh before continuing, "I've imagined myself dying countless times in my life, but I never thought that in a situation where the other side didn't even send out a single magician, I would run out of magic and wouldn't even be able to escape. Chairman Su, I have to admit, the power of your new flyer's military magic machines has far surpassed my expectations." This isn't just the power of the military magic machines. The more important thing is that my company and I have far surpassed your understanding of magic, Sui said. Arch-Magus Offarian couldn't help giving a snort. "Chairman Su, are you joking? Perhaps you've surpassed my and Reduca's understanding in certain aspects, but your company. Do you think that's possible?" "Of course it's possible." "No, it's not possible, it's a fact." Sui's expression was serious. "Let's not talk about anything else. Do you know what the magic barrier that trapped you was?" Arch-Magus Offarian and Arch-Magus Reduca looked at each other with ugly expressions. They had researched magic for dozens of years, but this was the first time they had encountered magic that they couldn't understand at all. Even they were helpless against it. If this was the result of New Flyer's research, then at least they couldn't compare in this aspect. Seeing the two silent, Sui turned to Arch-Magus Offarian and said, "Sir Offarian, do you know why I stopped you?" Arch-Magus Offarian gave a cold snort. "Isn't it because you're worried that if I break this ridiculous magic barrier, you won't be able to trap us?" Sui shrugged and spread his hands. "But I've already taken the initiative to open it." Arch-Magus Offarian's expression changed slightly. "Who knows what you're planning?" Arch-Magus Reduca pondered for a bit before asking, "Chairman Su, you mean? If Offarian does this, we might all lose our lives?" "It's not a possibility, it's a certainty," Sui replied with a serious expression. Arch-Magus Offarian immediately gave a cold smile with a face full of disbelief. "Sir Offarian, how about we make a bet?" Sui suggested. Arch-Magus Offarian looked at Sui with a cold smile, but didn't say anything. "I can simulate the situation just now and let you try it once. As for the result, you can decide for yourself. If you feel that the consequences aren't worth worrying about, then it'll be my loss. I'll have the new flyer guards immediately withdraw from Marrow City." Arch-Magus Offarian and Arch-Magus Reduca's expressions changed. If the new flyer guards took the initiative to withdraw from Marrow City, it would save them a lot of effort. "What if I lose?" Arch-Magus Offarian asked. "If you lose, then you and Arch-Magus Reduca are no longer allowed to interfere with the disputes between the New Flyer and the Canla Empire," Sui said. Arch-Magus Offarian pondered for a bit before nodding. "I can agree, but I can't replace Reduca." I can also agree. Archmagus Reduca interrupted. Archmagus Offarian looked at Archmagus Reduca in shock. Archmagus Reduca smiled at him and said, "If the result is as Chairman Su said, then what you just did might cause all of us to die here. That means that the new flyer already has the ability to kill us. If I continue to participate, wouldn't I be seeking death?" Archmagus Offarian frowned as he looked at Archmagus Reduca. After thinking for a bit, he reached out and patted Archmagus Reduca's shoulder. "All right, if Marshal Sudiman dares to cause trouble for you, then I'll stand with you." "Relax, Marshal Sudiman isn't that stupid," Archmagus Reduca said with a faint smile. Archmagus Offarian turned to look at Sui. "All right, Chairman Su, Reduca and I have accepted your bet. How do you plan on simulating the situation we just encountered?" "Wait a moment." Sui revealed a smile and reached out to take out a small magic communicator. Chapter 1106. After a moment, Sui ended the call and gestured for Archmage Offalian and Archmage Reduca to wait. After a while, Archmage Offalian and Archmage Reduca both sensed a strange change in the mana space in front of them near Marrow City. The two of them looked at each other and nodded in unison when they sensed a familiar feeling from the changes. The abnormality of this mana space was exactly the same as the magic cage that had trapped them. It was clear that the new flyer guards had used some unknown method to change the mana space in front of them. But this time, when they released their mana, they clearly sensed that the magic space was only a cuboid that was more than 20 meters tall and more than 10 meters wide. Due to the fact that they couldn't use their mana, they couldn't accurately determine the thickness of the cuboid. It wasn't like the magic cage that formed a perfect sphere that enveloped all of them. The two of them relaxed because this meant that Sui had the intention of letting them try again and didn't want to trap them again. Of course, with their current situation, Sui could easily get rid of them if he cooperated with the new flyer guards. There was no need to go through so much trouble. "Alright, Sir Offalian, you can try doing what you did just now. Of course, I have to remind you to stay far away from that mana space because the consequences of the mana space collapsing are far more terrifying than you can imagine." After saying this, Sui floated back a bit and made an inviting gesture. "This guy is so far away, isn't he afraid that we'll turn around and run?" Archmage Offalian looked at Sui, who had flown over 100 meters away, and asked with a frown, "What does he have to worry about? With what little mana we have left, even if we barely manage to escape, we definitely won't be able to escape his final pursuit. Moreover, he doesn't seem to have any intention of killing us, so why should we run? Besides, Offalian, are you really not curious?" Archmage Reduca asked back. "If I wasn't curious, I wouldn't have wasted so much time talking to him." Archmage Offalian coldly snorted and waved his hand at the 13 great mages who didn't know what to do, indicating for them to come over. He then explained his conversation with Sui and expressed his intention of trying to break through the special mana space with everyone's mana. The other 13 great mages naturally didn't have any objections. They had been ordered to listen to the two archmages and were also very curious about the situation that Sui had described. This was the magic power of Archmage Offalian and a total of 13 other great mages. Its strength was naturally terrifying, so how could it not break through a simple magic barrier? Even if this magic barrier had trapped all of them inside, it would still be able to break through it. Sui in the distance curiously watched as Archmage Offalian and the 13 great mages stood in the air. Then he could feel the changes in the surrounding magic space under the influence of Archmage Offalian's magic domain. Finally, the magic released by the 13 great mages was gathered bit by Archmage Offalian. The method that Archmage Offalian used had indeed exceeded his expectations. This special magic cage's target was currently an Archmage, so it wasn't a problem to trap Archmage Offalian, Archmage Reduca, and the other 13 great mages. But now, Grand Magus Aphelion had gathered the mana of 13 other great mages into one. This meant that he had obtained a large amount of mana that exceeded the level of a Grand Magus in a short period of time. This definitely exceeded the limit of what this magic cage could withstand. So that meant that if Archmage Aphelion had released that black ball, it was very likely that it would have broken this magic cage. However, it would have created a terrifying effect and the final result wouldn't have been able to be reversed. Sui had been hiding in the magic airship fleet the entire time, observing the battle. He never thought that this unexpected situation would occur and he would be forced to appear. He knew that whether it was Archmage Aphelion, Archmage Reduca, or even the other 13 great mages, to be able to become magicians at their level, they would have a strong curiosity and thirst for knowledge. Just relying on words to convince them was impossible. Only by telling them the results of their actions with ironclad facts would they truly realize the significance of this incident. Very soon, Archmage Aphelion had gathered the magic of the other 13 great mages, and there was another black ball that represented the extreme spatial compression in front of him. Archmage Aphelion suddenly turned to look at Sui. Sui revealed a smile and made a please gesture. Archmage Aphelion coldly snorted and moved the mana within his body. The black ball quickly flew towards the rectangular-shaped mana space that they had sensed had already changed. Everyone's eyes were focused on the black ball, watching it travel over 200 meters in an instant. The black ball quickly came into contact with the strange magic space. As soon as it came into contact, the space that couldn't be seen with the naked eye suddenly released countless sparkling lines, while also releasing a high-frequency ZZ sound. The black ball had indeed gathered the magic of Archmage Aphelion and the 13 great mages. The countless sparkling lines that appeared in the magic space were instantly sucked in. However, at the same time that one pattern disappeared, more patterns would appear. In the blink of an eye, the huge mana space was revealed to everyone because it was filled with glittering patterns. Seeing that the lines were actually confined to a rectangular-shaped space, Archmage Aphelion and Archmage Reduca exchanged astonished gazes. Normally speaking, powerful mages could use their control over the magic elements to forcefully create a special magic space. For example, the magic domain that the two of them controlled as archmages were a very obvious example. However, the magic space that mages created was a perfect sphere and wouldn't appear in any other shape. This was because mages could only use magic to control the magic elements in the space around them to form a special magic space. Then, depending on the strength of a mage's magic and their control over the magic elements, the range of influence would be different. However, due to the limit of their sensing range, it would form a spherical space with them as the center and the sensing range as the radius. Unless it was a special situation, no mage would create a special magic space because it would only increase the difficulty and they wouldn't be able to fully display their strength. Now, Sui had only used the magic communicator to say a few words, and the new flyer guards in Marrow City were actually able to create a rectangular-shaped magic space that looked extremely standard. It was truly amazing. Just based on the magic space, the Frestec Chamber of Commerce's guards in Marrow City had a better grasp of the magic space than all the great magicians. They weren't weaker than Archmagus Aphelion and Archmagus Reduca. If the two of them were also trapped inside just now, it wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that the new flyer guards had a better grasp of the magic space than the two of them. However, this was the strangest point. There were definitely mages in the new flyer guards, but they didn't even have great mages as guards, let alone archmages. But under such circumstances, how could they manifest such a powerful level of mana space? Could it be that they relied on the strange military magic machines in New Flyer? These questions flashed through the minds of the two archmages, but most of their attention was still focused on the collision between the black sphere and the mana space. The black sphere was constantly absorbing the colorful light patterns that burst out of the magic space. It looked like streams of light suddenly appeared in the void and flew into the black sphere. The scene was gorgeous and strange. However, no matter how much the black sphere absorbed, the colorful light patterns would always appear again, and the frequency was getting higher and faster. The black sphere that absorbed the light patterns was also getting bigger at a speed visible to the naked eye. In less than 2 minutes, the black sphere had more than doubled in size. If one were to pay more attention, they would find that the magic space was getting more and more abnormal. As the light patterns kept appearing and being absorbed by the black sphere, the magic space slowly dimmed. It was as if even the color was being absorbed by the black sphere. As the black sphere grew bigger, the color of the space became darker and darker. Finally, it became pitch black, as if the entire space was being affected by the black sphere. In the periphery of the rectangular space, shrouded by the abnormal magic power, there were obvious signs of spatial instability. One could even see the magical elements condensing in various strange ways on the periphery, automatically generating all kinds of strange magical phenomena. Aphelion, this is... Archmagus Reduca stared at the magic space that seemed like it could collapse at any time with a nervous expression. Archmagus Aphelion's face was as calm as water. He no longer had the unconvinced expression he had when facing Sui. His expression was very serious. Hearing Archmagus Reduca's words, he opened his mouth, but didn't say anything in the end. Archmagus Reduca looked at him and let out a soft sigh. He turned to look at Sui in the distance and said, "Chairman Su, we lost." Chapter 1107. The 13 great mages who were also staring at the situation of the magic space were stunned when they heard Archmage Reduca suddenly admit defeat. Their faces dimmed as they lowered their heads and didn't refute. Even if their level of magic couldn't compare to the 2 archmages, since they were great mages, they had a certain amount of research into magic spaces. With their level, they could easily see that if this mana space was allowed to continue developing, it would form the mana space chain collapse phenomenon that would make all mages pale at the mention of it. Once this happened, it meant that the magic space had become the most violent, dangerous, and uncontrollable situation. When faced with this kind of situation, no matter if you were a normal mage, a great mage, or even an archmage from the legends, there was only one choice, and that was to run far away. The only way to solve this situation was to let this completely collapsed mana space slowly be affected by other stable mana spaces around it, and then slowly return to normal. If Archmage Aphelion had done the same when they were trapped in the magic cage, then according to the current situation, the entire space within the magic cage would have collapsed. And they, who were trapped in the middle by the magic, would definitely have been drawn in as well. No one would have been able to escape. Thinking of this, everyone understood that Sui stopping Archmage Aphelion was actually saving their lives. Hearing Archmage Reduca's words, Sui didn't make any response. He only quietly looked at Archmage Aphelion, waiting for his reaction. Archmage Reduca and the other 13 great mages could feel Sui's attitude from this silence, so they all looked at Archmage Aphelion. Everyone knew that if it was a bet, Archmage Aphelion had undoubtedly lost. However, they were now enemies. If Archmage Aphelion didn't accept this bet, then Archmage Reduca and the other 13 great mages would naturally stand on his side. Moreover, after a period of rest, Archmagus Reduca and the other 13 great mages had recovered a bit. They already had the power to fight, so they didn't have to worry about Sui. Archmage Aphelion stared at the area where the abnormality was getting more and more serious. It looked like it was about to break through the cuboid area defined by the new flyer guard. After a moment of silence, he let out a long sigh. Just when everyone thought he would be like Archmagus Reduca and be forced to admit defeat, Archmagus Aphelion pointed at the special mana space and said, Chairman Su, if you have a way to restore this mana space to normal, then I'll admit defeat. Everyone was stunned. It looked like Archmage Aphelion had already confirmed his defeat, but he didn't directly admit defeat. Instead, he raised this condition. What was the meaning of this? It had to be known that the collapse of the mana space could be said to be a situation where all mages were helpless. For Archmagus Aphelion to raise this condition at this time, wasn't it clear that he wanted to renege on the bet? Thinking of this, Archmagus Leduca slightly knit his brows. The 13 great mages all focused their minds, ready to make a move at any time. They were very worried that Su-Yi would fly into a rage when he heard Archmagus Aphelion's condition and directly turn hostile. However, when Su-Yi heard this, he was only stunned for a moment before shrugging and revealing a relaxed smile. "What's so hard about that?" After throwing down these words, Su-Yi flew a bit closer to the abnormal mana space. He raised his hand and extended a finger. If one looked at it with the naked eye, they would see transparent ripples spreading out from Su-Yi's fingertip. It was as if he was poking his finger into a calm water surface. When these ripples spread outwards and came into contact with the abnormal mana space, the originally collapsing mana space actually eased a lot in an instant. As the ripples continued to spread, the huge black ball in the center of the mana space became smaller and smaller. The collapsing mana space also stopped and began to regain its color and stability. It was as if the mana space had been replayed in slow motion. In the end, the mana space returned to normal and even the black ball disappeared without a trace. The 2 Archmagi and the 13 great mages were all dumbstruck as they watched everything unfold in front of them. They almost couldn't believe their eyes. The mana space chain collapse was something that couldn't be solved. It was something that all mages considered untouchable, but it was actually resolved so easily by Su-Yi? Archmagus Aphelion stared blankly at the mana space that had returned to normal for a while before releasing his magic to investigate. After confirming that the space was no different from the other spaces, he couldn't help turning his head and looking at Su-Yi with a face full of shock. "Chairman Su-Yi," he opened his mouth, but he didn't know what to say for a while. Everything that happened today was almost beyond the common sense that he was familiar with. First, the new flyer guards clearly didn't have the help of powerful magicians, but they had actually created a perfect magic suppression domain. They had trapped him, Reduca, and the other 13 great mages inside and couldn't escape. Then there were the several dozen magic airships that they almost couldn't resist. Now it was Su-Yi who had resolved the mana space chain collapse with just a wave of his hand. He didn't believe that this was something that the new flyer guards could research, so the source was clearly Su-Yi, the new flyer's chairman. But Su-Yi was clearly someone who hadn't been an Archmagus for long, so why did he have such a shocking understanding of magic? He even had to admit that based on the situation today, Su-Yi's understanding of magic had far surpassed his. After coming to this conclusion in his heart, the expression on Archmagus Aphelion's face became much more dim. He looked at Su-Yi for a while before giving a sigh of deep meaning. He said with a bitter smile, "All right, Chairman Su, I've lost. At the same time, I have to admit that what you said last time was right. Reduca and I'm afraid that our magic concepts have fallen behind this era." The surrounding 13 great mages were all shocked. Su-Yi actually dared to say this in front of Archmagus Aphelion and Archmagus Reduca? This was truly shameless boasting. What qualification did he have to say this? This thought only appeared in the minds of the 13 great mages as if it were a conditioned reflex, but it was instantly suppressed by them. Of course, Su-Yi had the qualifications to say this. This was because the new flyer's performance today had already proven this point. Su-Yi revealed a faint smile. "Then Your Excellency Aphelion, Your Excellency Reduca, you have to accept your loss. Since the two of you have admitted your loss, Please follow our agreement from before and don't interfere in the future disputes between our Frestek Chamber of Commerce and the Kandra Empire. Archmagus Ophalion and Archmagus Reduca looked at each other and nodded. All right. But Chairman Su, I'm still very curious. What exactly do you want to do? Archmagus Ophalion looked at Su-yi with a face full of doubt. Although Reduca and I will withdraw according to our agreement and won't interfere in the matters between New Flyer and the Kanla Empire, the Kanla Empire doesn't only have us two archmages. The Kanla Empire's foundation is far deeper than you can imagine. Do you really think that with just your New Flyer and your military magic machines, you can conquer the Kanla Empire? The truth is that I can do it. The smile on Su-yi's face was full of confidence. Archmagus Ophalion couldn't help sneering again. Chairman Su, you're a bit too confident. Su-yi shrugged. If I don't even have this bit of confidence, where would I get the courage to go against the entire world? Archmagus Ophalion's eyes widened as he looked at Su-yi up and down. His eyes were filled with disbelief, as if it was his first day meeting him. In the end, he shook his head and sighed. Chairman Su, you really are a madman beyond my imagination. Many thanks for the compliment. After a short conversation, Archmagus Ophalion and Archmagus Reduca withdrew according to their agreement. The remaining 13 great mages and the rest of the Magus Corps couldn't leave as arrogantly as them. They were all sent by the Kanla Empire to deal with the new flyer guards invading Marrow City. If they directly retreated like this, they would definitely be held accountable by the military. However, the new flyer guards had already displayed strength that far exceeded their standard. Even the two strongest archmages couldn't do anything to them. It could be said that there was no reason for them to stay here. Thus, their situation was very awkward. After the 13 great mages discussed for a while, they could only lead the Magus Corps to meet up with the 50,000 reinforcements sent by the governor of the Southwest Province. They were stationed in a camp about 5 kilometers away from Marrow City, facing off against Marrow City from afar. Thus, a very strange situation formed around Marrow City. Marrow City was currently being occupied by the new flyer guard. There were 50,000 Kanla Empire soldiers outside the city, as well as a powerful Magus Corps with 13 great mages and over 100 high-level mages. However, they didn't seem to have any intention of attacking Marrow City and taking it back from the new flyer guard. It was as if they were just here to train. What was even stranger was that the new flyer guards in Marrow City didn't seem to put the Kanla Empire in their eyes at all. They didn't seem to have any intention of attacking them either. Both sides seemed to be silently waiting for something. Chapter 1108. The Kanla Empire's morning court session had never been as quiet as it was today. Ever since the Emperor's personal chamberlain, who was hosting the court meeting, announced that the main topic of this court meeting was how to deal with the situation in Meluo City, the court meeting hall fell into an eerie silence. No one spoke, and even the sound of everyone's breathing became much softer. If a needle fell to the ground at this time, they would be able to hear it clearly. The Kandra Emperor had a dark look as he looked over the faces of the ministers, but he found that everyone had their heads down and not a single person had any intention of looking up to speak. After patiently waiting for a while, the situation still didn't change. This made the Kandra Emperor even angrier. He gave a strong snort and said in a cold voice, "Very good, you're not willing to speak? Then I'll call you out. Marshal Sudiman, your army headquarters should be responsible for the situation in Marrow City. Tell me, what plans does your army headquarters have?" Marshal Sudiman, who was standing in front of the ministers, paused before looking up. He took a step forward and respectfully bowed to the Kandra Emperor before replying, "Your Majesty, the army headquarters is still evaluating the situation in Marrow City and don't have any detailed plans for now." Still in evaluation? The Kandra Emperor gave a cold laugh. The Kandra Emperor gave a cold laugh. You might as well just say that you don't have a way. Marshal Sudiman's lips twitched as he revealed a bitter smile that couldn't be seen. He really wanted to say that there was no way, but how could he say this in front of the Emperor? Now that an important city in the Empire had been invaded by foreign enemies, the army headquarters naturally had to take responsibility. However, the reports from the front lines made everyone speechless, and they could even be said to be helpless. Even Marshal Sudiman couldn't think of a better way to solve this problem. The reason was very simple: even the Arch-Magi had been defeated. As the strongest battle strength that the Kanla Empire's army headquarters were most proud of, the Arch-Magi had always been the symbol of the Kanla Empire's military strength, as well as the final trump card that the army headquarters relied on. Under normal circumstances, the Kanla Empire's military did not even need to deploy a force at the level of a magus. They could rely on their own strength to crush the enemy and obtain victory. The reason why Archmage Leduca was invited this time was mostly because the enemy was New Flyer. Because the Frestek Chamber of Commerce had 2 Arch-Magi, which was rarely seen on the continent, so to be safe, the army headquarters had invited Arch-Magus Reduca. They hoped that they could take back Beauty City as soon as possible and prevent the important cities of the Empire from falling into the hands of foreign enemies. One had to know that this was the first time something like this had happened in the past few decades. Every day that Marrow City remained in New Flyer's hands was another day of humiliation for the Kanla Empire's military. As for Arch-Magus Ophalion, the military didn't invite him to join them, but since Arch-Magus Ophalion had taken the initiative to ask to join, the military naturally wouldn't refuse. This was why they had sent out 2 Archmages at the same time and led the elite Magus Legion under the military. It was all for the sake of taking back Marrow City in one fell swoop and without any mistakes. Everyone in the army headquarters thought that since there were 2 Arch-Magi involved, no matter how strong the Frestek Chamber of Commerce's military magic machines were, with their pitiful guards, they wouldn't be able to stop them and Beautiful City would be easily taken back. Even if New Flyer dared to violate the unwritten rule of the continent's Magi Circle and had their 2 Archmages participate in the invasion of the Kanla Empire, the Kanla Empire wouldn't lose out in the slightest. Moreover, this was actually a good thing for the Kanla Empire. Because New Flyer had taken the initiative to violate this rule, the Kanla Empire could completely ignore this rule and have their 9 Archmages participate in the counterattack against New Flyer. At the same time, the 9 Archmages of the Mala Empire that had privately signed an agreement with the Kanla Empire, as well as the 3 Archmages of the Mana Magic Kingdom, also had an excuse to make a move against New Flyer. Although the Kanla Empire's invasion of the Kingdom of Ruhr had suffered a heavy setback, the Kanla Empire's military still had absolute confidence because they didn't have any Archmages participating. Now, if New Flyer broke this rule and allowed the Archmages of the 2 empires and the Mana Magic Kingdom to make a move, then they would simply be seeking their own death. However, reality exceeded everyone's expectations. The 2 Arch-Magi had led the elite magician army to fight a single battle in Beauty Gauze City, but they had been defeated. Not to mention taking back Beauty Gauze City from the Frestek Chamber of Commerce, they couldn't even touch Beauty Gauze City. Moreover, if it was only their defeat, then it wouldn't be a big deal because the 2 Archmages of the New Flyer, including President Su-Yi, had also made a move. However, according to the report of the 2 Archmages, the New Flyer's 2 Archmages hadn't made a move at all. In fact, New Flyer hadn't even made a move to force the 2 Archmages and 13 Great Mages into a desperate situation. If it wasn't for the New Flyer's President Su-Yi making a move to save them, the 2 Archmages, including the 2 Archmages, would have died without a burial ground. This result shocked everyone. 2 Archmages and 13 Great Mages had been forced into a desperate situation without the need for a mage to make a move? It was even possible for them to all die in battle? This went against everyone's common sense. In the traditional view of the signs, mages were the key to determining the outcome of a battle. Whichever side had more and higher quality magicians would have an absolute advantage on the battlefield. This point had been proven countless times in the history of the signs, and no one had ever doubted it. However, the new flyer had used ironclad facts to shatter this commonly accepted view. Not only could archmages be defeated, they could even be defeated without the use of mages. This fact instantly caused the Canla Empire's military to fall into a state of panic. If even the archmages couldn't do anything to the new flyer's guards, then what could they do? The Canla Empire's military had held countless strategic meetings to discuss how to deal with this situation. However, almost everyone had fallen into a state of chaos because the news brought back by the two archmages was too shocking. As a result, these meetings didn't produce any results at all. As the commander of the Empire's military, Marshal Sudirman couldn't do anything about this. He'd personally participated in and commanded no less than 1,000 battles in his life, but this was the first time he'd encountered a situation like this. Even the archmages couldn't be relied on, so how could they fight this battle? Marshal Sudirman, I'll ask you one more time. The high and mighty emperor did not care about the bitterness in Marshal Sudirman's heart at this moment. Seeing that Marshal Sudirman was silent, he was even angrier. He asked coldly again, "Is your military really unable to come up with a solution? If that's the case, then you don't have to be the commander of the military anymore. Get someone else who can come up with a solution." Hearing the emperor's last words, everyone in the court was shocked. They all raised their heads and looked at the emperor and Marshal Sudirman in shock. Marshal Sudirman was known as the military god of the Canla Empire. He had a high prestige in both the military headquarters and the empire. If he was stripped of his position as commander at this time, it would create a large commotion in the empire. Marshal Sudirman was silent for a bit before giving a sigh. Then he gave a bow to the emperor and sincerely said, "Your Majesty, I don't covet my current position, but at this juncture, I hope that your Majesty can give this old minister a chance. Let me continue to play a role as commander of the military headquarters and continue to deal with this crisis." The Kandra Emperor gave a cold snort and leaned back, as his expression softened a bit. For the stability of the Canla Empire, of course he couldn't just take away Marshal Sudirman's position as commander. He was just saying this to force Marshal Sudirman. Then tell me, is there really no way to deal with the new flyer? If we don't have a way to deal with them now that they have taken Beauty City, what if they continue to invade the Empire and even invade Wimbledon City? What should we do? Marshal Sudirman was silent for a bit before saying in a deep voice, "Your Majesty, based on the current situation, we have already come to a conclusion. It is to avoid fighting the new flyer guards on the battlefield as much as possible." Hearing this, there was a bit of chaos in the court. The other ministers all looked at each other in surprise, clearly having been scared by Marshal Sudirman's words. The Lord Marshal actually said that they couldn't fight the new flyer guards on the battlefield? What a joke! The Empire had an army of several 100,000 and they had the best equipment and supplies, but the new flyer guards only added up to around 20,000. Even if the new flyer guards had some powerful military magic machines, so what? Could it be that they could fight the Empire's elite army that was countless times bigger than them? But the Kandra Emperor wasn't that surprised as he asked, "If we can't fight them on the battlefield, how can we drive these fellows out of our Empire's territory?" "Your Majesty, what decides the outcome of a war isn't just the battlefield, there are many other aspects. On the battlefield, the Empire's army is lacking compared to the new flyer guards, but in other aspects, the Empire is countless times stronger than a small new flyer. Of course, to do this, it isn't just the responsibility of our army headquarters." After saying this, Marshal Sudirman turned around and looked over the ministers in the court before his face became incomparably cold. "Your Majesty, in this special time, we have to use some special methods. A chill filled the hearts of the ministers, and they couldn't help looking at the Kandra Emperor. However, His Majesty also glanced at the officials and nodded slightly. "Your words are very reasonable." Chapter 1109. After the two Arch-Magi retreated from Marrow City, the situation in Marrow City became a bit strange. In the next half a month, the Kanla Empire didn't make any moves. No army came to attack Marrow City, and the Kanla Empire didn't send any reinforcements. Even the elite magician legion sent by the Kanla Empire silently retreated one morning. Only the 50,000 reinforcements sent by the Southwest Province's Governor's Manor were left in a camp 5 kilometers away from Marrow City, but they didn't have any intention of attacking Marrow City. If these 50,000 people were ignored, Marrow City was like it had been forgotten by the Kanla Empire. It was very peaceful. But outside Marrow City, the situation on the continent wasn't peaceful at all. It was even becoming more and more intense. On the 13th day of the 10th month, when the first cold wind of winter blew from the north, the Malar Empire and the exiled Mala Empire formed an alliance to attack the Fok Kingdom's territory that had been taken over by the Drake Duchy. Before this battle, the three Mala Empire Arch-Magi announced that they would participate in this battle. As for their participation, the reason given by the three Arch-Magi was that the Drake Duchy was the aggressor. They were only helping the Fok Kingdom take back their territory and rebuild their country. This was a just war. Because of the participation of the three Arch-Magi, even if the Kanla Empire was equipped with large amounts of military magic machines, they couldn't resist the powerful attacks of the Arch-Magi. They were forced to retreat as soon as the battle began. At the same time, there was an army from the Mala Empire to the east that attacked the territory of the Lampari Kingdom that had been taken over by the Frank Kingdom. This army was even stronger than the one that attacked the Drake Duchy, with a total of 200,000 soldiers. There were over 500 high-level magicians and 28 great magicians, as well as 4 Arch-Magi participating in the battle. Even if the Lampuri Kingdom's military was without a doubt stronger than the Drake Duchies, under the terrifying attack of the Marlow Empire, it was hard to resist. In just 3 days, they had been pushed back 100 kilometers, giving up a large piece of territory to the Drake Duchy. On the 15th day of the 10th month, 2 days after the Mala Empire and Frank Kingdom attacked the Lampari Kingdom and the Drake Duchy, the Kanla Empire suddenly sent out an army. They split into 3 groups. One group of 150,000 soldiers attacked the territory of the Frank Kingdom that was now controlled by the Lampari Kingdom. Cooperating with the northern attack of the Mala Empire and Frank Kingdom, the total number of enemies that entered this area had reached 350,000. There were also large numbers of magicians from the Mala Empire and Kanla Empire, as well as 6 arch-magicians. Seeing that the difference in strength between the two sides was too great, the Lampari Kingdom did not put up too much resistance and retreated another 300 kilometers in just 5 days. In addition to the territory that they had lost under the attack of the Mala Empire, the Lampari Kingdom had already surrendered almost half of the territory that they had taken from the Frank Kingdom in less than 10 days of the war. The other 2 groups of the Kanla Empire's army headed south and invaded the Kingdom of Ruhr once again. This time, the Kanla Empire's army was not like the previous 2 invasions of the Kingdom of Ruhr, where they put on a battle stance and advanced steadily. Instead, the entire army of 50,000 was made up of elite light cavalry. They did not enter the Kingdom of Ruhr with the intention of conquering the land and cities, but headed straight for the various mines in the Kingdom of Ruhr. Because the light cavalry came and went like the wind and were extremely agile, and the Kingdom of Ruhr did not have enough manpower and did not have strict defenses, the 50,000 light cavalry took less than a week to destroy a total of 13 mines in the Kingdom of Ruhr, causing them to be completely paralyzed. Among these 13 mines, 5 of them belonged to the New Flyer, and 6 of the remaining 8 mines were jointly developed by the Kingdom of Ruhr and the New Flyer. In the end, the Kandla Empire's army went from the southeast corner of the Kandla Empire and directly invaded the Kingdom of Ruhr that was already under the control of the New Flyer. Along with the appearance of this army, riots led by the people of Ruhr broke out all over the Kingdom of Ruhr. Almost all the facilities the Fresteck Chamber of Commerce had set up in the Drow Kingdom had been seriously damaged. Other than the area near the Drow Kingdom's capital that was protected by the Fresteck Chamber of Commerce's guard base, the other areas of the Drow Kingdom quickly fell into chaos and broke free from the Fresteck Chamber of Commerce's control. However, the Kandla Empire's army did not directly attack the New Flyer guard base near the Kingdom of Ruhr as many people expected. Instead, they turned south and invaded the Duchy of Wales. Although the Duchy of Wales also received a large number of military magic machines from the New Flyer, it was still a poor and weak duchy in the end. Its military strength was small and its foundation was weak. There was no way it could resist the Kandla Empire's army. Under the attack of the Kandla Empire's army, the Duchy of Wales's army was routed and quickly occupied by the Kandla Empire's army. Only the southern port's territory had not fallen. While the Western and Central Signs' war was in full swing, the eastern part of the continent was not idle either. On the 27th of October, when the Eastern Kandla Empire's army invaded the Duchy of Wales, the Mana Magic Kingdom led a total of 13 countries that had previously signed a cooperation agreement with the two empires. Under the slogan of "Restoring Order on the Continent," they formed a huge army with a total of over 300,000 soldiers and attacked the Nozdormu Business Union Kingdom and the surrounding countries in the southwest region of the continent that was controlled by the Nozdormu Business Union Kingdom and the surrounding countries. In this alliance, not only did the Mana Magic Kingdom's 3 magisters participate in the war, there were also 2 magisters that had always been in seclusion who announced their participation in the war. Under the participation of 5 magisters, hundreds of great magisters, and a large number of advanced magisters, the Nozdormu Business Union Kingdom's army of less than 130,000 was extremely weak. Even if the Nozdormu Business Union Kingdom had greatly imported military magic machines from the New Flyer, less than a third of their army had completed the upgrade. Their overall strength was still insufficient to contend against the enemy. Therefore, after the war started, the Nozdormu Business Union Kingdom's side was also defeated. It was only when they finally retreated to the Nozdormu Business Union Kingdom's territory that they temporarily stabilized their footing with the help of the magic defense system that the New Flyer helped to build and stopped the trend of being defeated. However, from the comparison of the strength of both sides, the Nozdormu Business Union Kingdom clearly did not have any chance to counterattack. Once the enemy's magisters shed all pretense of cordiality and brazenly broke the unwritten rule of the Kandla Empire that magisters cannot participate in the war of invading other countries, then the fate of the Nozdormu Business Union Kingdom would be in danger. 2 months ago, the entire continent was shocked by the disastrous defeat of the Kandla Empire and the Mala Empire when they invaded the Kingdom of Ruhr and the Drake Duchy. A month and a half ago, the entire continent suffered a crushing defeat because of the New Flyer's sharp counterattack. Even the Frankian Kingdom, the Drake Kingdom, and several other countries that were part of the two empires faction were directly annihilated. They were completely intimidated by the strength of the New Flyers faction, to the point that many people thought that the continent would undergo a huge change because of this and fall into the control of the New Flyer. However, the two empires represented the various countries and immediately obtained such a glorious result. On the contrary, the New Flyers faction was continuously retreating and did not display any valiant strength. As a result, the direction of public opinion in the signs immediately reversed. Almost everyone was singing the praises of the two empires, saying that the two empires represented the traditions of the continent. The Frestec Chamber of Commerce was just relying on a bit of novelty to gain some advantages, but because they couldn't compare to the two empires in terms of background, naturally they couldn't shake the position of the two empires. People believed that the new power represented by the Xinfei Chamber of Commerce would be crushed by the two empires very quickly and the entire signs would return to the traditional order. These fellows really flattered themselves silly. Sui put down the large stack of newspapers in his hands and shook his head with a smile. Some of these newspapers came from the Kanla Empire, some from the Mala Empire, and some from the other two empires' factions. They all had the same view, and that was that the two empires represented the orthodoxy of the continent. The new flyer was just a clown jumping around and could not affect the overall situation. Sooner or later, they would be crushed by the two empires. Sui was naturally dismissive of this view, but he was also very clear that the majority of the people on the continent would think this way. Even many people in the New Flyers faction thought this way. The reason was that the two empires' factions had launched a fierce counterattack in the past 2 months, causing the New Flyers faction to suffer a large-scale setback. Naturally, this had shaken people's confidence. There was only one way to change people's views, and that was to speak with facts and speak with strength. As long as they could crush the two empires' counterattack, then the direction of the entire continent would definitely change again. Teacher Carmilla glanced at the stack of newspapers that Sui threw on the table and asked seriously, "Kid, what do you plan to do?" Hearing this question, Sui sighed softly. "I originally wanted to use the gentler method to tell people that the world has changed, but it's clear that I was wrong. Grandfather, you and Steele are right, I'm often too idealistic, and even a little naive. In this world, the most useful thing to say is always the fist." Sui paused and slapped the stack of newspapers. His expression and eyes turned resolute. "Since they want war, then I'll give them war." Chapter 11:10. The cold wind came from the north and invaded Lieutenant Nakmo's neck. He couldn't help shivering as he pulled his collar and shrunk his body back. Looking up, the dark clouds in the sky were thicker than when they left the camp. It was like there was a layer of cotton that hadn't been completely removed from their head. "It seems like it's going to snow again." Lieutenant Nakmo let out a soft breath that formed a clear white mist in front of him. It was already the middle of November. For this small town that was located in the central part of the Frankish kingdom, as well as being a little north of the central part of the Signs, it wasn't strange for it to snow. Lieutenant Nakmo was originally a native of a village near Greenview Town. He had lived here for more than 10 years and only left after joining the Frankish kingdom's army, so of course he understood the weather here. "Hey, Captain, do you think we still need to patrol in this terrible weather?" complained a Frankish soldier who was following behind Nakmo with his neck shrunk back. "Even the rabbits aren't willing to leave their nests. I don't believe that the Lampuri people will attack in this kind of weather." Lieutenant Nakmo turned back to look at him and gave a cold snort. "Shut your beak, Makan. This is an order from above. Do you have the guts to not follow it?" The soldier called Makan spat out and muttered, "It's not our Frankish commander's order, why do we have to follow it? Those Mala Empire fellows only know how to order us to do this kind of dirty work for them. They can do it themselves if they have the skills." Lieutenant Nakmo knit his brows and looked at the other members of the patrol team behind him. He found that their expressions weren't that different from Makan's, revealing a trace of dissatisfaction, so he couldn't help giving a sigh. This wasn't strange. Not to mention his soldiers being dissatisfied, even he was a bit dissatisfied in his heart. Although with the help of the Mala Empire, the Frankish kingdom's government in exile and their army finally had the hope of taking back their territory from the Lampari kingdom and the Drake Duchy, because the Mala Empire had the absolute advantage in the alliance, the Frankish kingdom's soldiers were always sent out to do dirty work. When it came to military merits, they didn't exist, so naturally the Frankish kingdom's soldiers would be very dissatisfied. However, as an officer, First Lieutenant Nok Mo knew more than these ordinary soldiers, so he understood that there was nothing he could do about this situation. If it wasn't for the help of the Mala Empire, the Frankish kingdom would have been destroyed several months ago, and there was no chance of a counterattack. If it wasn't for the Mala Empire sending out a few archmages to participate in the war, perhaps even the Mala Empire wouldn't be able to do anything to the Lampari kingdom and the Drake Duchy. Then the Frankish kingdom would have even less hope of recovering their country by relying on their own strength. So in the end, the Frankish kingdom was completely relying on the Mala Empire, so what qualifications did they have to talk about their own status? Lieutenant Nok Mo could understand the complaints of the soldiers, but relatively speaking, although he was a bit dissatisfied, he was more grateful. If it wasn't for the help of the Mala Empire, he might not have been able to return to this familiar land in his life. Since a few months ago, the Fok Kingdom and the Marlow Empire's army had been defeated by the Lampuri Kingdom and the Drake Duchy's army, surrendering this small city of Greentek. Lieutenant Nok Mo had lost contact with his family in the nearby village. Half a month ago, after the Mala Empire's allied forces had retaken Grimwi City from the Lampari Kingdom, Lieutenant Nok Mo took the time to go back and re-establish contact with his family. Because of this, Lieutenant Nok Mo naturally held a trace of gratitude towards the Mala Empire. But when he thought of the situation when he reunited with his family, Lieutenant Nok Mo felt that his gratitude towards the Mala Empire wasn't so clear. After reuniting with his family, contrary to his expectations, not only did his family not suffer the persecution of the Lampari Kingdom's army like he had imagined, rather they were all glowing and filled with energy. Other than being a bit worried about losing contact with him, their days were much better than before. When it came to the Lampari Kingdom's situation after taking over this place, his family didn't complain at all about the Lampari Kingdom's side and were even filled with praise. They said that after the Lampari Kingdom took over this place, they exempted most of the heavy taxes that normal farmers had to pay each year. Moreover, they had sent out a small team of agricultural magic machines to help them harvest the crops, making this year's harvest very easy. Because of this, Lieutenant Nok Mo's parents and little brother, who had already grown up, could save some time to work in the offices of the Lampari Kingdom's companies in Grimwi City for a few months, earning a total of over 30 gold coins. This situation greatly exceeded Lieutenant Nok Mo's expectations, and it filled his heart with a bit of doubt. The small city of Grimvitai was originally the private territory of Count Grimvitai of the Frankish Kingdom. When this land was still under the rule of the Frankish Kingdom, the people of the Frankish Kingdom had to pay a large amount of taxes to Count Grimvitai according to tradition and could only leave some rations to fill their stomachs. Even though Count Grim was one of the few lords in the Frankish Kingdom who had a conscience and was willing to take care of the commoners, almost all of the people in his territory, including First Lieutenant Nok Mo, were still very nervous. Hunger was a common occurrence. But when the territory around Grimwi City fell into the control of the Lampari Kingdom, most of the citizens were exempted from paying taxes, instantly causing a large change in the lives of these citizens. Not mentioning anything else, just Lieutenant Nok Mo's family had harvested a total of 1,300 pounds of wheat in this fall harvest. If it was in the past, no less than 400 pounds of wheat would have to be handed over to Count Grimwi City. After that, they would only be left with 400 pounds of wheat. Lieutenant Nok Mo's family, excluding Lieutenant Nok Mo, who had already joined the army, had 5 other people. They had to rely on these 400 pounds of wheat to survive until the next spring harvest. One could imagine how difficult their lives would be. But when this place was taken over by the Lampuri Kingdom, according to the new policy announced by the Lampuri Kingdom, they only needed to pay 300 pounds of this 1,300 pounds of wheat. The rest would be left for Lieutenant Nok Mo's family. Compared to the previous 400 pounds of wheat, 1,000 pounds of wheat was more than twice as much. Naturally, it made Lieutenant Nakmo's family's lives a lot better. Moreover, after the Lampari Kingdom occupied Grimwe City, several chambers of commerce from the Lampari Kingdom, the Kingdom of Ruhr, and the Drake Duchy entered and developed Grimwe City. They recruited a large number of local workers and allowed many people to find a job and receive several tens of shiny gold coins that the citizens didn't even dare to think about before. With the help of gold coins, Lieutenant Nakmo's family's lives became more comfortable. Because of the lack of food and clothing, every winter was the most difficult time for Lieutenant Nakmo's family. But after this year's winter, not only were the other 5 people able to eat their fill, they also used the tens of gold coins that their parents and younger brother had earned to buy 2 brand new cotton-padded jackets from the Lampari Kingdom's Armani Chamber of Commerce. They didn't have to endure the cold like before. Thinking of the 2 new cotton-padded jackets that his younger brother and sister had flaunted to him, Lieutenant Nakmo couldn't help but lower his head to look at what he was wearing. As an officer, his clothes were naturally better than normal soldiers, but it was only a thin layer of cotton-padded jacket under a layer of coarse leather armor that was about to be worn out. He didn't need to touch it at all. He could feel how light and thin the cotton-padded jacket was just by his body. He could even feel the cold wind directly seeping in. It could be seen how poor the quality of the cotton-padded jacket was. However, when this tattered cotton-padded jacket was given to him, a full 3 gold coins were deducted from his salary as an officer. It had to be known that his salary as a lieutenant was only 15 gold coins a year. Thinking of this, Lieutenant Nakmo's mouth once again raised a trace of a bitter smile. In the past, his 15 gold coins a year was a great supplement to his family. It allowed his family to live a little better than other families in the village. This also allowed him to receive a lot of special treatment every time he returned home. But now, just by his younger brother going to the Lampari Kingdom's office in the small town of Grimvitai for a few months, he had already earned more than 10 gold coins. Adding on the income of his parents, his 15 gold coins didn't seem that important. Even when his younger brother talked to him about this matter, he had a look of disdain and told him to simply not be a soldier and that it would be better for him to work in the Lampari Kingdom's Chamber of Commerce. This was because he had heard that if he did well in those Chamber of Commerce, it wouldn't be strange for him to earn 15 gold coins a month. Apart from this, there was a very obvious difference. The new cotton-padded jackets that his younger brother and sister were wearing were thick and warm, and they looked very good. When he bought them from the Armani Chamber of Commerce, they only cost 1 gold coin and 40 silver coins. If he bought 2 at a time, it would be 10 silver coins cheaper. Compared to this, the value of his thin cotton-padded jacket wasn't enough. But it was hard for Lieutenant Nakmo to complain about anything because whether it was the previous Frankish kingdom or the Marlow Empire he had been in for a few months, the price of a jacket filled with precious cotton was very high. Just based on his thin cotton-padded jacket, it wouldn't be a problem to sell it for 2 gold coins. God knows why the damned Armani Chamber of Commerce could sell it for such a low price. Weren't they afraid of making a loss? But thinking about it, the Frankish kingdom's refusal of the Armani Chamber of Commerce to enter the Frankish kingdom was reasonable. If the Armani Chamber of Commerce entered, the merchants of the Frankish kingdom who relied on selling cotton-padded jackets every winter would all be squeezed out. But what did this have to do with the commoners? As a commoner who couldn't wait to spend a silver coin, who didn't want to be able to buy a cheap, warm, and beautiful new cotton-padded jacket? Brother, it would be great if this place was occupied by the Lampari Kingdom forever. Thinking of his 11-year-old sister's innocent words, the bitter smile on Lieutenant Nakmo's face deepened. These words sounded naive, but how could it not be his sister's heartfelt words? It might even be the heartfelt words of his parents and brother, and even the heartfelt words of all the commoners in the small town of Grimvitai. Chapter 11:11. The patrol team followed their usual patrol route and left Grimvitai City. After traveling for about 5 kilometers in the southwest direction, they saw a mountain range in the distance. This mountain range was the largest in the southern part of the former Frankish kingdom. It was called the Grecius Mountain Range. If one continued to travel south from Grimvite city, they would have to travel hundreds of kilometers to the east or west to bypass the Grecius Mountain Range if they did not want to pass through the valley in the southwest of Grimvite city. Therefore, this mountain range was a clear dividing line between the northern and southern parts of the former Frankish kingdom. Nearly a month ago, under the attack of the Malfa alliance, the Lampari kingdom's army retreated all the way to the Grecius mountain range. They relied on the fortifications they had built in advance at the only passageway in the Grecius mountain range, the Dawn Valley, to resist the attack of the Malfa alliance. It had to be said that the fortifications built by the Lampari kingdom here were too strong. In this month, the Malfa alliance had launched a total of 14 attacks on this valley, many of which were led by 4 mage tutors and the most powerful mages in the alliance. However, they still could not break through the defenses here. Even with the counterattack of the Lampuri kingdom's army, the Malfa army had suffered heavy losses. In less than a month of fighting, there were over 20,000 soldiers that had died, with over 40,000 that were heavily injured and countless that were lightly injured. These were not the worst. The real loss was that in these 14 battles, the Malfa alliance had lost more than 100 high-level mages and even 2 great mages to the Lampari kingdom's army. In addition, even the 4 mage tutors could not do anything. This caused the mountain range to become an insurmountable barrier in front of the Malfa alliance, preventing them from expanding their gains and reclaiming the territory that originally belonged to the Frankish kingdom from the Lampari kingdom. In the past week, the higher-ups of the Malfa alliance had temporarily given up on attacking the Dawn Valley. They decided to stabilize the situation in the territory that originally belonged to the Frankish kingdom from the Lampari kingdom before making any further plans. Therefore, the 2 armies were now in a stalemate near the Grecius mountain range. Of course, this did not mean that both sides would really be at peace. Whether it was the Malfa alliance army or the Lampari kingdom, they would definitely find an opportunity to launch another attack. Therefore, during this period of time, the Malfa alliance had been strengthening their patrols of the Grecius mountains. On one hand, they were guarding against the Lampari kingdom's sudden counterattack, and on the other hand, they were looking for loopholes in the Lampari kingdom's army to break through the Grecius mountains. First Lieutenant Nakmo and his squad of 17 Frankish soldiers were one of the scouting squads in charge of scouting. Lieutenant Nakmo and his subordinates had patrolled the area many times over the past few days. They knew where they were even with their eyes closed. Naturally, there was no need for further exploration. Now that they had entered a place where they could see the Grecius mountains with their naked eyes, they had finally reached the area where they needed to be more vigilant. According to the information obtained from the battle with the Lampari kingdom's army, the Lampari kingdom's army was now equipped with the newest magic cannons from New Flyer, which had a range of over 4 kilometers. If they were to attack from above the Grecius mountains, the range could easily reach over 5 kilometers. So when Lieutenant Nakmo and his subordinates entered this area, it meant that they could be attacked by the Lampari kingdom's magic cannons at any time, which would put their lives in danger. Of course, this was only a theoretical consideration. Actually, the Lampari kingdom wouldn't waste their precious magic cannons on the Malfa alliance's scouting squads who knew where. This kind of precious resource would only be used in a direct confrontation. In terms of scouting and counter-scouting, other than using the magic airships in the sky to scout from above, the Lampari kingdom would also send scouting squads out of the Grecius mountains most of the time. After the giant and unparalleled magic airships appeared in his mind, Lieutenant Nakmo looked up into the sky. He found that there weren't any suspicious black dots flying in the sky right now, so he nodded and calmed down. Because the Lampari kingdom had the magic airships, the Malfa alliance's movements and information could be easily found, so they had suffered quite a bit in this aspect. Just 2 days ago, there were 3 scouting squads that had been attacked by the Lampari Kingdom's army when they approached the Grecius Mountains. Not a single person had been brought back. So even if Lieutenant Nakmo and his team hadn't seen a single Lampari Kingdom's army for a week, he was still very careful and tried to avoid being the center of attention. After leading his subordinates through the lush forest at the foot of the Grecius Mountains for another 2 kilometers, Lieutenant Nakmo had everyone stop. With a wave of his hand, the team members all took their positions and entered a state of alert. In a situation where they were prepared, Lieutenant Nakmo believed that his team could easily eliminate an unprepared Frankish Kingdom team. But if the other side was prepared, then he didn't need to think too much and just needed to run for his life. After fighting with the Lampari Kingdom countless times, even if the Malfa Alliance had several times more soldiers than the Lampari Kingdom, the real advantage they had was the help of the 4 Arch-Magi. If they didn't have the help of the 4 Arch-Magi on the battlefield, a traditional soldier like Lieutenant Nakmo, who was still equipped with a sword, would be able to deal with a single soldier of the Lampari Kingdom who was fully equipped with military magic machines. Hey, if there was a single Lampari Kingdom soldier, how good would that be? If we could take care of him when he wasn't prepared, we could take all his equipment. Thinking of the powerful military magic machines that the Lampari Kingdom soldiers had, Lieutenant Nakmo couldn't help drooling. If he had such a set of equipment, he might even have a chance of winning against a mage. Of course, he was also clear that even if he really encountered a lone Lampari Kingdom soldier and took the military magic machines from him, they would still be taken away by the higher-up. Now, the Mala Empire was in great need of the military magic machines that the Lampari Kingdom's army was equipped with so that they could have more examples to study and imitate. It was said that within the Mala Empire, a large team of mages and craftsmen had been formed to research the military magic machines with all their might. They were trying their best to reduce the gap between the military equipment of the new flyer camp. However, these things obviously wouldn't be produced in a short period of time. At the very least, Lieutenant Nakmo didn't see many military magic machines in the Malar Empire's army all of a sudden. After seeing that his subordinates had already hidden themselves in their respective positions, First Lieutenant Nokimo climbed up a tree and hid himself in the trunk. He took out a pair of binoculars and looked through the gaps in the leaves towards the Grecius Mountains in the distance. Actually, there wasn't anything to see here. In the previous week of scouting, every time Lieutenant Nakmo led his subordinates to this area, they would find that the Lampari Kingdom's army was obediently staying in their positions in the Grecius Mountains, not showing their heads at all. Even if they occasionally saw a few figures, they would only flash by and they wouldn't be able to see any movements at all. But Lieutenant Nakmo's mission was to see if there were any strange movements from the Lampari Kingdom's side. As long as he stayed here for a day, he would have completed his mission. After watching for a while and confirming that there was nothing strange with the Lampari Kingdom's camp, Lieutenant Nakmo gave a bored yawn and prepared to take a rest with the binoculars. When this thought appeared, there was a black spot that appeared in his field of vision. Lieutenant Nakmo was surprised before quickly looking over. He quickly determined that it should be a magic airship. This magic airship came from the sky to the south of the Grecius Mountains and slowly landed in the Lampari Kingdom's camp. Because there was a wall separating them, Lieutenant Nakmo didn't see what kind of people or goods came out of the magic airship. But according to the information from the other scouting teams, the Lampari Kingdom's magic airships often came from the south. It was guessed that they were transporting some goods from the south to the Lampari Kingdom's army stationed in the Grecius Mountains. When he heard this information before, Lieutenant Nakmo didn't believe it because there were only 20 magic airships in the Mala Empire right now, and they were all taken by the people with the highest positions in the Mala Empire. There was only one in the Mala Empire right now, so it could be seen how precious this thing was. Moreover, according to what Lieutenant Nakmo knew, the magic airship consumed a lot of energy to fly, so it wasn't cost-effective to use this thing to transport goods. Even if the Lampari Kingdom had quite a few magic airships, they shouldn't be this extravagant. But it was like deliberately slapping Lieutenant Nakmo's face. When he had this thought, there was another magic airship that appeared in front of him. Before he could react, there were magic airships that appeared one after another in the sky to the south. Soon there was a black cloud in the sky that almost covered the entire Grecius mountain range. Seeing this strange situation, no matter how ignorant Lieutenant Nakmo was, he knew that something was about to happen. Chapter 11-12. On the third day after the Lampari Kingdom's magic airships arrived, the Malfa Alliance army felt that it was different from before. The Lampari Kingdom's army that had been relying on the terrain of the Grecius mountain range to defend against the attacks of the Malfa Alliance army had suddenly changed and took the initiative to attack from their fortifications. However, when the Malfa Alliance army saw the Lampari Kingdom's army attacking, they couldn't help being stunned. When they fought the Lampari Kingdom's army before, although the Lampari Kingdom's military magic machines were incomparably strong, at least the Malfa Alliance army could see through the military magic machines that they used. For example, as the main firepower, the magic cannons that the other countries of the continent were working on were the magic cannons, which could continuously release magic cannons that could create large explosions. Or, for example, the magic mines that could be placed in front of the army and would explode when someone pressed down on them. Or, for example, the magic repeating crossbows that almost every Lampari Kingdom soldier was equipped with. In short, although these military magic machines were strong and had an attack power that far surpassed traditional swords, it wasn't hard to understand. Now that the other countries of the continent had developed the military magic machines that they had bought from the New Flyer, they could imitate quite a few of them. Even the magic cannons and magic repeating crossbows that the two empires produced could be used on the battlefield. Of course, the military magic machines that the two empires developed were still lacking compared to the New Flyer's military magic machines, whether it was in terms of quality or power. Adding in the fact that the production was far from enough, it didn't play the important role that the two empires had expected. In the end, they had to rely on more powerful magicians and their military strength to suppress the enemy. However, when they saw the Lampari Kingdom's army attacking again, they found that there were many things in the Lampari Kingdom's army that they couldn't recognize at all. For example, the iron magic cars that covered the mountains like bricks in the front made the soldiers of the Malfa Alliance army feel confused when they saw them. What were these things used for? Could it be that the Lampari Kingdom was planning on using these magic cars to charge into the Malfa Alliance army? Only the high-level Malur Empire generals of the Malfa Alliance army knit their brows and had vigilant looks. Although they had never seen this thing before, according to the information from the Kanla Empire, these strange magic cars were very likely the New Flyer magic tanks that the Kanla Empire had met when they invaded the Kingdom of Ruhr. According to the reports, this magic tank was made of steel, so it was very hard. At the same time, it was equipped with the Frestek Chamber of Commerce's unique magic shield technology. Not to mention normal soldiers not being able to damage it at all, even normal magicians wouldn't be able to hurt it. It really was an overlord-level military magic machine on the battlefield. They could. Magic cannons. A magic. Used cannons. This meant that the appearance of these magic tanks perfectly solved the problem of the magic cannons being inconvenient to move. They could move freely on the battlefield and release incomparably powerful explosions. If they wanted normal soldiers to stop these magic tanks, it was simply a fantasy. The Marlow Empire's Army General Phil, who was in charge of the Marlow Empire's army, thought about the contents of the report. Then he didn't hesitate to request the 4 Archmagi to make a move. The 4 Archmages didn't refuse and readily led their mage legions to attack as well. If it was said that when the battle began, these 4 arch-magi didn't care about the powerful military magic machines that the Lampari Kingdom and the Mala Empire's army talked about, but after fighting the Lampari Kingdom for a month, these arch-magi who were at the peak of all magicians had no choice but to pay attention to them. Although with their powerful magic, they could suppress the Lampari Kingdom's army on the battlefield and force them to retreat, the Lampari Kingdom's army would always be at a disadvantage and would never be defeated. Even under the forbidden spells of the 4 arch-magi, the Lampari Kingdom's army could use their magic shields to block them and retreat after suffering a small loss. Moreover, the Lampari Kingdom's army could hold on until the 4 arch-magi and their magician army ran out of magic each time, so it was hard for them to chase after them. With this kind of result, even if the Malfa Alliance army forced the Lampari Kingdom's army back to the Grecius mountain range, they still didn't have much confidence. Adding in the fact that they couldn't take down the Grecius mountain range after attacking it more than 10 times, this was a serious blow to the confidence of the Malfa Alliance army's generals. The fact that even the 4 arch-magi couldn't break through the Lampari Kingdom's army's position on the Grecius mountain range was beyond everyone's expectations. In previous wars, as long as arch-magi took action, it meant that the battle had reached its end. Whichever side had more arch-magi would be able to tilt the outcome of the battle towards that side. But now, the Lampari Kingdom didn't even have a single arch-magi, while the Malfa Alliance army had 4 arch-magi. However, the outcome of the battle was still not in their favor, which went against everyone's common sense. Now that the Lampari Kingdom's army was finally willing to come out of that damned position that was harder than a tortoise's shell, it was equivalent to giving the Malfa Alliance army a good opportunity to defeat them. Therefore, the moment the 4 arch-magi came out of the formation, they attacked with all their might and instantly prepared 4 powerful forbidden spells. The sky that was showing signs of clearing up due to the recent snowfall was now a glaring blood red. This was a sign that the fire-forbidden spell, Doomsday Catastrophe, was about to be activated. In this blood-red sky, countless bolts of lightning flashed faintly, as if they were about to strike at any time. This was the sign that the wind-forbidden spell, Thunder God's Descent, was about to be activated. The vast land in front of them seemed to have suddenly turned into a pot of boiling water, constantly stirring. This was the sign that the earth-forbidden spell, Earthweb, was about to be activated. Countless streams of water vapor suddenly appeared in the air, then quickly condensed together. In the blink of an eye, the vapor turned into water droplets, then condensed into ice, and finally formed icicles that flickered with a cold light. This was the water-forbidden spell, Icicle Dance, which was ready to strike at any time. It was extremely rare to see such a powerful forbidden spell on the battlefield, but now 4 of them had appeared in one go, and they were all personally attacked by 4 arch-magi. One could imagine the power that would erupt at the end. However, regardless of whether it was the 4 arch-magi, the commander of the Malfa Alliance army, or the ordinary soldiers, their expressions didn't change much. It was as if they didn't have much confidence in these 4 forbidden spells. The Malfa Alliance army had fought with the Lampari Kingdom's army several dozen times. They had used forbidden spells to attack the Lampari Kingdom's army over 100 times, but the Lampari Kingdom's army had been able to take it each time. It was to the point that the Malfa Alliance army couldn't help doubting the might of these forbidden spells. But if they didn't use forbidden spells, normal magic attacks were like tickles to the Lampari Kingdom's army, they wouldn't be able to affect them at all. As for the ordinary soldiers, what a joke! Could it be that the ordinary soldiers would use their swords, spears, and halberds to fight with the Lampari Kingdom's army that was equipped with large amounts of military magic machines? It wasn't that the Malfa Alliance army hadn't tried this before. In the first few battles with the Lampari Kingdom's army, the commander of the Malfa Alliance army had ordered his soldiers to regroup with the Lampari Kingdom's army. But under the concentrated attacks of the Lampari Kingdom's magic cannons, they had lost over 10,000 soldiers in a single charge. This made the commander of the Malfa Alliance army no longer dare to send his soldiers to their deaths. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that the battle between the Malfa Alliance army and the Lampari Kingdom's army was like watching the performance of the four Arch-Magi. If the four Arch-Magi could suppress the Lampari Kingdom's army, then the Malfa Alliance army would win. Once, General Phil forcefully shook his head and threw away the worry in his heart. Impossible! How could the Arch-Magi lose? Seeing the large amount of Lampari Kingdom's army that had fallen into the range of the four Arch-Magi's terrifying forbidden spells, General Phil was secretly happy, but he was also a bit doubtful. This wasn't the first time the Lampari Kingdom's army had fought them, so they should be able to tell. Why would they send their subordinates to their deaths in the range of the forbidden spells? Could it be that they were confident in blocking the forbidden spells with their magic tanks? When the doubts in General Phil's heart appeared, there was a dark cloud that suddenly appeared in the Lampari Kingdom's army's camp in the Grecian mountains, flying over in this direction. General Phil didn't need to use binoculars to know that it should be the magic airships that the Lampari Kingdom had sent the day before yesterday. But the number of magic airships really exceeded his expectations. There were at least 30 of them with a single glance. According to the reports, the Lampari Kingdom only had 50 magic airships in total, and now they had sent out most of them. But, under the attack of the four Arch-Magi's forbidden spells, what could these magic airships do? After that, the magic airships gave the answer. Chapter 11-13. The several dozen magic airships suddenly scattered in all directions like they had exploded, instantly flying far away from where the two Magi were fighting. Then in front of the confused gazes of the Malfa Alliance army, the magic airships that had scattered in all directions shot out sparkling things at the same time. They formed a beautiful curtain of light in the sky that covered the entire area. These things were just too small, so General Phil couldn't clearly see what they looked like with his binoculars. But with his experience from hundreds of battles, he instinctively felt that these little things weren't anything good. He immediately gave the order to the Magician Legion and had them stop the magic airships, stopping them from setting up those little things that were glowing. But before the Magician Legion could move out, from the Lampari Kingdom's position in the Grecian mountains in the distance, there were countless fiery red lights that densely covered the entire sky. Seeing this scene, everyone in the Malfa Alliance army was shocked. Of course they could see that this should be the attack of the Lampari Kingdom's magic cannons, but wasn't this attack too terrifying? There were over 100 magic cannons that appeared in the sky at the same time. This meant that the Lampari Kingdom's side had over 100 magic cannons firing at the same time. In the previous battles, the Lampari Kingdom had never used such terrifying firepower. Moreover, this kind of attack consumed a considerable amount of magic cannons. Based on this consumption rate, how long could the Lampari Kingdom's army last? If they didn't have this kind of firepower, the Malfa Alliance army could even send out normal soldiers to attack. The Lampari Kingdom wouldn't be this irrational, right? However, this was not the time to consider these issues. Seeing that the dense artillery fire was flying towards them from the sky, the Mage Legion of the Malfa Alliance army did not wait for General Phil's orders. They immediately cast their magic shields and shrouded the surrounding Malfa Alliance army. After fighting the Lampari Kingdom's army over 100 times, they were already very familiar with this action. Even the normal soldiers of the Malfa Alliance army were already used to this, so they huddled together and hid behind the magic shields released by the magicians around them. There were no magicians that tried to use magic to stop the magic cannons in the sky because they had tried this countless times before, but they had never succeeded. So when they met this kind of attack, the only thought the magicians had was to defend as much as possible. Hong, 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 there was a series of deafening explosions. With the protection of the Magician Legion, the Malfa Alliance army didn't suffer any losses. However, the mages didn't even have a chance to catch their breath. Hundreds of fiery lights flashed in the sky, completely overshadowing the red light emitted by the fire-forbidden spell. Hong 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 hong, the magic cannonballs kept being fired from the Lampuri Kingdom's camp on the Grecius mountain range, falling onto the Malfa army like rain. The terrifying explosions didn't stop, causing General Phil's ears to ring, but it also made the doubt on his face stronger and stronger. What were those fellows from the Lampari Kingdom thinking? If they were throwing magic cannons like they didn't need money, they wouldn't have enough magic cannons even if they had more. After knitting his brows to think for a bit, General Phil had an idea and thought of a possibility. Could it be that the Lampari Kingdom people want to use these magic cannons to use up all the magic of our magicians and then use the military magic machines to fight? But General Phil looked at the 4 arch-magi who were still preparing forbidden spells. Because these 4 forbidden spells were very terrifying, even the arch-magi needed some time to prepare, so they still weren't ready yet. But once they were prepared, the magic tanks that had charged out of the Grecius mountain range and arrived in front of both sides would be buried by these 4 forbidden spells. The Lampari Kingdom wouldn't be this stupid, right? General Phil was still thinking about this problem when he suddenly found that Archmagus Nagin, who was preparing the forbidden fire spell in the air, suddenly swayed before falling down from the sky like a kite with its string cut. General Phil was shocked and, without thinking, he charged in the direction Archmagus Nagin had fallen in. But before he could take 2 steps, he found that the magicians who were supporting the magic shields for the soldiers below were falling down one by one. One of the magicians had fallen in front of him, and if it wasn't for General Phil's quick reaction, he would have been trampled to death. However, even if he wasn't trampled to death, this fellow with the 8th grade magician badge had already fallen from over 10 meters in the air. He was spitting out blood and was on his last breath, looking like he didn't have much life left in him. General Phil looked around in shock and saw that quite a few of the magicians who had fallen were caught by the soldiers below. They weren't in any danger, but they couldn't move because of the impact. As for the rest that weren't caught, they were all in danger. 3 figures suddenly floated down from the sky and landed right beside General Phil. General Phil looked carefully and found that it was the other 3 arch-magi. He let out a sigh of relief. "The 3 of you, what exactly happened? How did you?" General Phil anxiously asked. "General, retreat immediately, this place is all ready." One of the arch-magi had just said half a sentence when a flame suddenly fell less than 10 meters in front of General Phil. Boom! A violent explosion sounded in his ears and General Phil's vision went black. Then he was blown off his horse by an irresistible shockwave mixed with dirt and gravel. When he fell to the ground more than 10 meters away, he had already lost consciousness. ####. In late November, a large amount of snow fell that covered dozens of countries in the central and northern parts of the continent. This meant that the signs had officially entered the bitter cold of winter. However, compared to the impact that this piece of news had on the continent, this snow was insignificant. In the middle of November, the Malur Empire and the Frankish Kingdom's allied forces engaged in a fierce battle with the Lampari Kingdom's army at the Grecius mountain range in the south of the former Frankish Kingdom. In the battle, the Malur Empire's allied forces had a total of 160,000 soldiers, while the Lampari Kingdom's army had a total of 40,000 soldiers. However, in the end, the Malur Empire's allied forces suffered a crushing defeat, and the Lampari Kingdom obtained a complete victory. If it was just this result, it wouldn't be particularly shocking. However, in this battle, the Malur Empire's allied forces had lost a total of 60,000 soldiers, and countless others were seriously injured or missing. In the end, only 50,000 managed to successfully retreat. Among these losses, what really shocked everyone was that one of the 4 arch-magi from the Malur Empire had actually died on the spot. 9 years ago, Archmagus Levin Hasek had perished while attacking the New Flyers' headquarters. This was already big news that shocked the entire signs. This was because in the history of signs, there had been very few arch-magi who had perished by accident. There hadn't even been one in the past few hundred years. However, Archmagus Levin Hasek's death could be attributed to his arrogance. He had gone to attack the New Flyer's headquarters and fell into the trap set by the New Flyer. Moreover, at that time, the New Flyer already had teacher Carmilla, who was an Archmagus on the same level as Archmagus Levin Hasek. In addition, they also had a Great Magus. In theory, they had the ability to contend with Archmagus Levin Hasek and Sarander Cray the Sorcerer. However, this time, Archmagus Nagin from the Mala Empire had perished in a battle with the Lampari Kingdom's army. Not only did the Lampari Kingdom's army not have a single Archmagus, they didn't even have a few Great Magi. Yet, they were able to successfully kill Archmagus Nagin. This was truly inconceivable. What was even more unbelievable was that the Malar Empire's army didn't only have Archmagus Nagin, they also had 3 other Arch-Magi. A total of 4 Arch-Magi had joined forces, but one of them had perished and the other 3 had escaped with serious injuries. This had never happened in the entire history of signs. After everyone recovered from their shock, they were filled with doubt. How did the Lampari Kingdom's army do it? It wasn't strange for them to be able to defeat the Malar Empire's army because they had large amounts of military magic machines provided by the New Flyer. However, how did they defeat the combined forces of 4 incomparably powerful Arch-Magi? In addition to their shock and doubts, many people also began to panic. To the people of signs, Magi had always been a special human being with a status far higher than ordinary people. As for Arch-Magi, they were at the peak of all Magi. In the hearts of ordinary people, they were like gods that could only be worshipped and could not be resisted. However, now, the Lampari Kingdom's army had used ironclad facts to tell everyone that Arch-Magi were not invincible. They could even lose their lives under the attacks of ordinary people. To many people, this was simply like the image of a god collapsing in their heart. Naturally, it was hard for them to accept, and they even began to panic. This blow might not be so serious to the people of other countries on the continent, but to the people of the Mala Empire, it was fatal. To the people of the Kanla Empire, the blow was equally huge because the Kanla Empire had 9 Arch-Magi like the Mala Empire. They had always been regarded as protectors by the people of the Kanla Empire. Now that their protectors were no longer as invincible as they had imagined, did this mean that the 2 empires were no longer invincible? Chapter 11:14. It was now December, and it was already the winter season in the north, where heavy snow was falling. According to the traditions of the signs, it was obviously not a suitable time for any military operations. This was because, in such cold weather, even a normal march could cause a large number of soldiers to freeze to death. Not to mention, the roads were slippery and muddy due to the snow, making it difficult to march. Therefore, winter was a season of truce in the signs, and no country would choose to start a war at this time. However, this year's winter completely broke this tradition. In the middle of November, the Lampuri Kingdom had defeated the Malfa army near the Grecius mountain range, wiping out 2/3 of the Malfa army's main force of 200,000. They had even surprised everyone by killing an Arch-Magus that countless people thought was invincible on the battlefield. With just this victory, the situation between the 2 sides had been reversed in an instant. Before this, the Lampari Kingdom's army had been defeated by the Malfa alliance, and by the time they retreated to the Grecius mountain range, they had already returned more than half of the territory that they had taken from the Frankish kingdom. At that time, everyone felt that the Lampari Kingdom had no ability to resist, and could only be chased out of the Frankish kingdom by the Malfa alliance. If the Malar Empire was even more daring and directly broke the tradition of the signs that Magi were not allowed to invade other countries, then the Malfa alliance would most likely invade the Lampari Kingdom directly. And this possibility was very high. This was because in this war that had engulfed almost the entire signs, one side was represented by the new flyer, while the other side was led by the two empires. At the same time, they also had the powerful mana magic kingdom, which included almost all the magi in the signs other than the two magi in the Xinfei Chamber of Commerce. In addition, the Sorcerers' Guild that had been passed down for thousands of years in the signs supported the two empires. With the support of such a powerful force, it was not strange to break this unwritten tradition. After all, there were countless reasons to participate in the war. If such a thing really happened, the Lampari Kingdom would definitely not be able to resist the attack of the Malfa Alliance, and the Lampari Kingdom would probably be destroyed in the end. However, the battle at the Grecius mountain range had shattered everyone's expectations. Perhaps some people had guessed that the new flyer had the ability to help the Lampari Kingdom deal with the Malfa Alliance, but no one would have guessed that the Lampari Kingdom could defeat the Malfa Alliance in just one battle. What really made the difference was that the Lampari Kingdom's army had actually managed to kill a Magus and seriously injure 3 others. God above. This was the result of facing nearly 200,000 Malfa Alliance soldiers, hundreds of high-level mages, dozens of great mages, and 4 great mages. Based on the lineup of the Malfa Alliance soldiers, almost everyone thought that the Malfa Alliance soldiers would not even know how to lose. They did not expect that they would be so weak in the face of the Lampari Kingdom's real counterattack. Such a result in just one battle instantly made people question the combat power of the Malfa Alliance soldiers. Everyone no longer believed that the Malfa Alliance soldiers had the ability to defeat the Lampari Kingdom, and people even doubted whether the two empires could win. There were 2 main reasons why the two empires were able to completely suppress the new flyer during the previous war. Firstly, it was because they had an absolute advantage in terms of numbers, and could suppress the new flyer on the battlefield. Secondly, it was because the two empires had a strong foundation and sufficient manpower, and could organize multiple attacks at the same time, making it difficult for the new flyer to deal with. However, after the battle in the Grecius Mountains, everyone realized that the great mages were not as invincible as they thought. Even the 4 great mages could not resist the attack of the Lampari Kingdom's army, and 1 of them died and 3 were injured. Thus, the two empires' greatest reliance on the battlefield was gone. At the same time, a very important problem was revealed in this battle. That was, the ordinary soldiers of the two empires were like defenseless children facing fully armed adults in front of the new flyer's army. They had no ability to resist at all, and could only passively take a beating. In the battle of the Grecius mountain range, 1 of the 4 arch-magi had died and 3 were injured. The Marlow Empire still had an army of 160,000, and they were equipped with military magic machines developed by the Marlow Empire, so their battle strength should still be very strong. However, under the attack of the Lampari Kingdom, the 160,000 Malfa Alliance soldiers could not put up any effective resistance at all. In less than an hour, most of them were killed, and the entire army was almost wiped out. Correspondingly, the losses announced by the Lampari Kingdom were almost 0. Even if the Malfa Alliance soldiers' morale had collapsed, such a loss was still beyond everyone's common sense. After this battle, no one believed that the traditional armies of the two empires could still pose a threat to the new flyer's army, which was equipped with a large number of different military magic machines. In addition, the high-level mages, great mages, and even great mages could no longer play a huge role in turning the tide of the battle. The result was obvious. The two empires were no match for the new flyer's army in a head-on battle. The only way to turn the situation around was to rely on their strategic depth that far exceeded that of the new flyer's army to delay the battle, and finally find an opportunity to wear down the enemy. The battle in the Grecius Mountains happened in early winter, and this was good news for the two empires. As winter was about to arrive, even if the Lampari Kingdom had a great advantage, they could only temporarily halt their advance and give the Malur Empire time to catch their breath. If they could have a winter to catch their breath, the results would be unpredictable when they fought again next year. However, the Lampari kingdom exceeded everyone's expectations and didn't give the Malur Empire time to catch their breath. On the 6th day of the 12th month, a large amount of snow covered the Frankish kingdom and southern parts of the Malur Empire. The Lampari kingdom's army unexpectedly launched an attack. In just half a day, 30,000 soldiers with several hundred magic tanks and magic war chariots had arrived at St. Lus city, where the Malfa Alliance army had retreated from the battle in the Grecius Mountains. After fighting for half a day, St. Lus city was broken through and the remaining 20,000 soldiers of the Malfa Alliance army escaped north. On the 9th day of the 12th month, the Lampari kingdom's army chased the remaining 20,000 soldiers of the Malfa Alliance army and blocked them in the Slode Valley to the north of the Frankish kingdom. The Malfa Alliance army saw that they couldn't resist, so their commander General Phil chose to surrender and the Malfa Alliance army was completely wiped out. 3 days later, the Lampari kingdom's army invaded Nalian city to the north of the Frankish kingdom, regaining control of the Frankish kingdom's territory that had been taken back by the Malfa Alliance army. At this point, everyone thought that since the Lampari kingdom's army had taken back the Frankish kingdom's territory, they should stop. After all, they would be entering the Malur Empire's territory, and if they entered, it would be tantamount to invading the Malur Empire. Fighting back against the Malur Empire's attack and invading the Malur Empire were two completely different concepts. In the several hundred years since the Malur Empire was established, all the countries that had invaded the Malur Empire had suffered heavy blows. Even the Kanla Empire wasn't an exception. No one believed that the Lampari Kingdom, a small country that didn't stand out on the continent 10 years ago, would have the courage to invade the Malur Empire, even if they had defeated the Malfa Alliance army. However, the Lampari kingdom once again used facts to shatter everyone's guesses. On the 23rd of December, the Lampari kingdom's army that had rested for 10 days moved out. They brazenly crossed the southern border of the Malur Empire and officially invaded the Malur Empire. Although the Malur Empire didn't expect the Lampari kingdom to really dare to invade, they had already taken precautions. After the defeat of the Malfa Alliance army in the Battle of Grecius Mountain Range, they had already retreated the army that had attacked the Drake Duchy and mobilized troops from other places to guard the border. Due to the importance of the Lampari kingdom's army, the Malur Empire could be said to have mobilized almost all the power within the empire. Just the remaining 5 magisters were all mobilized, and the total military strength was as high as 360,000. However, this had no meaning. From the 24th of December to the 30th of December, after a week of fierce fighting, the Malur Empire paid a heavy price of over 100,000 dead, 80,000 heavily injured, and countless fleeing. In addition, more than 400 high-level magicians, 9 great magicians, and 2 magisters were killed, while the rest were heavily injured. However, they still couldn't resist the attack of the Lampari kingdom's army and suffered a crushing defeat. The Malur Empire's defensive line thus collapsed, and the Lampari kingdom's army marched straight in. The 1st of January, year 3783, was the first day of the new year. For the people of the Signs, this was an important festival to welcome the new year. However, for the important figures of the Malur Empire and the 2 empires, this was a day that made them tremble with fear. Because from today onwards, as the Lampari kingdom's army stepped into the Malur Empire, the 2 empires that represented the traditions of the Signs would collapse along with the collapse of the Malur Empire's defensive line. Chapter 11:15. The Lampari kingdom's army had forcefully defeated the Malur Empire's powerful defensive line, stepping into the Malur Empire with terrifying footstep. There was a different scene in the new flight commerce main base in the Principality of Constantine. Although the new flyer was one of the main characters of the 2 camps, The chaos of the outside world and the intense battles on the continent didn't seem to affect the New Flight Commerce main base that much. Because it was New Year's, the New Flyer decided to take a break a week before New Year's like usual, so the main base wasn't as busy as usual. Even the roaring of the magic machines in the factories were much quieter. But this didn't mean that the New Flyer wasn't affected at all. As the main character of the New Flyer camp, they were the ones who provided military magic machines to their partner countries, helping them defeat the two empires, even helping the Lampari kingdom fight back, and now even being able to invade the Malar Empire. The New Flyer was without a doubt the most important role in this war that swept the continent. Not mentioning anything else, just to provide the Lampari kingdom with enough military magic machines and ammunition, the New Flyer had built a new military magic machine production base last year. The new base had been built at the beginning of last year, but as the situation on the signs worsened, it turned into an all-out war. This new base could be said to have been fully operational in the second half of last year, making all kinds of military magic machines without stopping. It was because of Su Yi's powerful foresight last year that the Lampari Kingdom, the Kingdom of Ruhr, the Nozdormu Business Union Kingdom, and the other partners of the New Flyer had enough military magic machines, allowing them to resist the powerful attacks of the two empires on the battlefield. After Su Yi's plan to lure in Arch-Magus Reduca and Arch-Magus Aphelion, they had successfully tested a new anti-magic domain that could deal with enemy magicians. The New Flyer had solved the most serious problem for their partners, which was the threat of the Arch-Magi. This was something that had been displayed in the battle between the Lampari Kingdom and the Marlow army. The Malar Empire had lost an Arch-Magus in the Battle of the Grecius Mountain Range, and then they had lost two Arch-Magi in the Border Defense Battle. This was equal to telling everyone that Arch-Magi were no longer invincible in people's minds, they no longer had the power to decide the outcome of a battle. In other words, after the Lampari Kingdom had killed 3 Arch-Magi from the Mala Empire in these two battles, it made everyone understand that only the military magic machines provided by the New Flyer could decide the outcome of the war. Normal magicians couldn't do this, even the strongest Arch-Magi couldn't do this. In order to strengthen this understanding in people's hearts, although the other departments of the New Flyer had their annual leave this year, the military magic machine departments were forced to work overtime for the first time. Of course, because working overtime for the new year was special, the company gave the workers 3 times their normal wage, so the workers were all very happy to work overtime. Then again, there were wars happening all over the continent, so rather than taking risks, it was better to stay in the New Flight Commerce main base that could be considered the safest place on the continent. There were even many workers from the other departments that weren't willing to leave after the holidays and chose to stay. Other than that, there were also many workers who brought their family members that weren't in the Principality of Constantine to the Principality of Constantine, deciding to settle down here. Su Yi was very happy with this. The thing he was most dissatisfied with on the signs was that because of the serious food problem, the population was very small compared to Earth, especially the Celestial Empire. It made it very hard for the New Flyer to recruit enough people to develop. If more and more people settled in the Principality of Constantine, he could use the resources of the New Flyer to train large amounts of people for the New Flyer. In the long run, this was beneficial no matter what. He even wanted to grab a bunch of people and put them into the military magic machine production base, working hard for the large amounts of military magic machine orders from the Lampari Kingdom and the other countries. However, this wasn't realistic. The military magic machines were very powerful, and the corresponding requirements were also very high. This was especially true for the all-around anti-magic field equipment that was urgently needed on the battlefield, especially for mages. There was no room for error, and it required a lot of people who had a deep understanding of magic. At the very least, they had to have a deep understanding of magic formations before they were qualified to participate. This kind of talent couldn't be trained in a short period of time. Su-yi directly grabbed a batch of graduates from the new flyer, training them while they worked, but they still couldn't meet the current demand. Where would he find enough people in this field in a short period of time? Every time he thought of this, Su-yi couldn't help but sigh. Although the ratio of mages in the signs was very low, there were still over 100,000 of them in absolute numbers. It wasn't a small number at all. If half of these mages, no, even if it was only a third or even a quarter or even a fifth of them worked for the new flyer, he wouldn't have to worry about the lack of talent all the time. Among these mages, the ones that Su-yi felt the most pity for were the 3 archmages that had fallen in the battle with the Lampari Kingdom's army. In Su-yi's opinion, archmages were currently the mages with the deepest understanding of magic in the signs. They were also the mages with the strongest magic power. As long as they were given some training, they would be able to have a very large effect on the magic machine industry. The fall of the 3 archmages was the fall of 3 top talents to Su-yi. When he received this news, Su-yi didn't say anything, but his heart was extremely pained. If these 3 archmages hadn't fallen in a meaningless battle in Su-yi's opinion, and had instead contributed their strength to the new flyer, it would have definitely allowed the magic machine industry to develop even faster. It would also allow Su-yi to take another step forward in his ideals. That was why, even though the new flyer guards outside Marrow City had the ability to kill Archmage Ophelion and Archmage Reduca, Su-yi had still taken a certain risk and let them leave. It was all for the sake of protecting top talents like the archmages. However, the contradiction was that Su-yi had to make the new flyer's side display enough power to eliminate the archmages from the battlefield. Only then would the others take this point seriously. In the end, there were still archmages that had fallen, and 3 of them had fallen at once. Su-yi was deeply pained by this, but there was nothing he could do about it. AI, how good would it be if everyone could focus on development? What a pity! When he thought of this, Su-yi couldn't help but sigh in his heart again. He shook his head with a wry smile. Sir Chairman, what is it? Did we do something wrong? The supervisor of the new flyer's military magic machine department, Lowndes, who was by Su-yi's side, hurriedly asked when he saw the strange expression on Su-yi's face. No, it's just that when I saw the military magic machines being sent out one by one, I couldn't help but feel a trace of emotion when I thought about how they were going to be sent to the various armies and personally buried countless lives. Su-yi shook his head. This time, it was Lowndes who had a very strange expression on his face. Why did the president suddenly become sentimental? Could it be that Sir Chairman was actually a very sensitive and delicate person? How was that possible? His mind was filled with all sorts of thoughts, but it didn't affect Lowndes' smile. Sir Chairman, there's nothing we can do about it. We've never thought of conquering anyone, but those fellows from the 2 empires aren't willing to do so. If we don't teach them a lesson, I'm afraid we'll never have a day of peace in the future. Su-yi smiled. He knew that Lowndes had misunderstood, but he couldn't be bothered to explain. He waved his hand. It's just a moment of emotion, it won't affect my mood. All right, the inspection here is done. You've done a good job. Continue to maintain this efficiency and strive not to make any mistake. This year is very likely to be the most important year for our new flyer, and even for the entire signs. And the one who will decide the final result is actually the department you're in charge of. So, Su-yi patted Lowndes' shoulder, stared into his eyes and said seriously, You have a lot of guts, do you have the confidence to do a good job? Lowndes immediately replied, Sir Chairman, please rest assured. I promise that there won't be any mistakes here. Very good. Su-yi patted Lowndes' shoulder again, indicating that he should go back to work. He then left with the other new flyer executives who had accompanied him to inspect the military magic machine manufacturing base on the first day of the new year. The group returned to the conference hall of the new Flight Commerce main base. After taking their seats, New Flyer's finance director Seabass took out a document from his bag and handed it to Sui. Sir Chairman, this is the company's initial financial budget for this year. From the current estimate, I'm afraid it's not good. Seabass' expression was very serious. This kind of expression was extremely rare on his face, because New Flyer's financial situation had always been very good since its establishment. Seabass' expression was always very relaxed. But now, the serious expression on his face made him very serious, so much so that Sui couldn't help but sit up a little straighter after hearing this. Only then did he pick up the document. In this document related to New Flyer's financial budget for this year, Seabass listed in detail the various funds that New Flyer might need this year, and finally came to a general conclusion. This conclusion was indeed enough to make Seabass reveal such a serious expression, because according to this conclusion, according to the various plans and investments that New Flyer had planned for this year, if there were no obvious changes or sudden profits, then New Flyer's financial situation this year would be the first time in history that it would be such a serious deficit. This deficit could even be as high as 20 to 40 million gold coins. And in the financial report at the end of last year, New Flyer's net profit for the same period of the year before was close to 200 million gold coins, but it suddenly fell to less than 50 million gold coins. The drop couldn't be said to be small. But this year, according to Seabass' estimation, there would even be a deficit. This was the first time in the 20 years since New Flyer's establishment that such a situation had occurred, and the deficit for the first time wasn't a small amount. It was no wonder that Seabass revealed such a serious expression. After all, he was New Flyer's finance director, so he was the one who had the most direct contact with these numbers. Moreover, he was the one who was most clear about the reason for this possible deficit. Sir Chairman, forgive me for speaking bluntly. Seeing Sui finish reading the entire report and raise his head again, Seabass said with an unusually serious expression, "We should immediately stop providing free assistance to the Lampari Kingdom and other countries. Otherwise, in less than 2 years, our company will directly close down due to the serious financial burden." Chapter 11:16. Everyone in the conference room was shocked. The CEO Grius frowned and said in a deep voice, "Manager Seabass, please don't be an alarmist. Although our company has invested a lot in the war these past 2 years, putting a lot of pressure on our finances, it's still too much to say that it will cause our company to close down. That's right. Our company isn't stupid. Would we really go and help those countries for free? Don't forget that we got a lot of mineral resources from them." The president of the Xinfei Mining Chamber of Commerce, Li Sop, also agreed. "Although we don't have the time to get those minerals out, they will only be more valuable in the future. We will be making a steady profit. It can't just be mineral resources." The president of the Xinfei Household Magical Machinery Chamber of Commerce, Ankado, also said, "Apart from these things, as long as our company wins this war, we can force the 2 empires and the other countries to lower their tariffs. Even if we don't count the other things, just this point alone will make us a lot of money. When the time comes, not to mention a mere few tens of millions of gold coins, just our household magical machinery department will have a profit of over 100 million gold coins a year. Do you believe me? Hey, you guys have been talking for so long, but you've forgotten the most important thing. It's not like we had to fight this war. We were forced by those guys from the 2 empires, okay? If we don't help those countries, are we going to let the 2 empires come knocking on our door and get rid of us?" When these words were said, the entire conference room fell into silence again. That's right. With New Flyer's previous rapid development, it wouldn't take long before New Flyer's products would sweep through all the countries on the continent. With the high convenience and high quality of the various magic machines produced by New Flyer, the profits that New Flyer could make were simply unimaginable. That's why for New Flyer, stable development was the best method. There was no need to blindly stir up trouble or even start a war. This war had been started by the two empires since the beginning, and they had been expanding. The Frestec Chamber of Commerce had only been passively fighting. It wasn't hard to guess what the two empires were thinking. They clearly saw the large influence of the magic machine industry led by the Frestec Chamber of Commerce, as well as the large benefits hidden in it. They weren't willing to see a normal company like the Frestec Chamber of Commerce control it, so they made an exception to attack the Frestec Chamber of Commerce. They wanted to take this new industry that had good prospects in their hand. Of course, the military magic machines developed by New Flyer did indeed make them very wary. Otherwise, with the strength of the two empires, they wouldn't even need to work together. They could do it themselves. In this situation, if the New Flyer didn't resist with all its might, the two empires would undoubtedly divide and annex the New Flyer after dealing with the New Flyer's allies. Therefore, this was a matter of life and death for New Flyer. There was no room for hesitation. As for money, if the New Flyer was gone, what was the point of thinking about money? Many people in the conference room looked at Seabass with a trace of dissatisfaction. Today was the most important meeting of the New Flyer on the first day of the new year. It would discuss the specific policies of the New Flyer in the new year. At this critical juncture, everyone naturally hoped that everyone could unite and get through this difficult time. However, Seabass jumped out and poured a bucket of cold water, which naturally made everyone unhappy. Seabass ignored everyone's gazes and only looked at Sue, waiting for Sue to speak. After everyone glared at Seabass, they all turned their gazes to Sue. In the end, the policies of the Chamber of Commerce were ultimately decided by the president. No matter what others said, it didn't have much meaning. Sue looked around, patted the financial report, and said with a smile, "Seabass is only giving the correct opinion from his point of view as the financial manager of the Chamber of Commerce. Why are you all so agitated?" Everyone stared blankly. The dwarf Lysop had always been outspoken and immediately asked, "Sir President, could it be that you agree with Seabass to reduce or give up on the support to the Lampari Kingdom and other countries?" "No, of course not." Sue immediately shook his head. "Now is the most critical moment of the war. Moreover, we have already seen the dawn of victory and have begun our counterattack. How can we give up on our allies at this time?" Everyone let out a sigh of relief. Seabass also didn't blink, as if he wasn't surprised by Suyi's answer. "Sir President, the financial situation of the Chamber of Commerce is a fact. Please pay attention to it." "I understand." Sui nodded and turned to Enkato to ask, "Enkato, how is the situation of your household magic machine Chamber of Commerce this year?" Enkato was startled. He didn't expect Sui to suddenly change the topic to him. After thinking for a bit, he shook his head with an awkward smile. "Not very good. There are already 53 countries that have put a ban on our product. The remaining half of the countries have also greatly reduced their orders to us because of the war. Coupled with the heavy losses caused by the war, it is very difficult for a lot of goods to arrive safely even if there are orders. Just last month, we lost more than 1 million gold coins worth of goods on the road, which is almost half of last month's total profit." Hearing Enkto's words, the other managers of the Frestec Chamber of Commerce's departments and branches all gave sighs. The Shinfei Household Magical Machinery Chamber of Commerce wasn't the only one in a similar situation. Due to the effects of the war that affected more than half of the continent, most of the trade routes on the continent were blocked. In the past half-year, almost all of the New Flyer's business had suffered an extremely severe decline. This caused the overall profits of the New Flyer to greatly decrease. Even if there were many countries that were willing to cooperate with the Frestec Chamber of Commerce, because the two empires and the countries that belonged to them represented the most deeply rooted traditional powers on the Signs continent, as well as having the strongest economy on the continent. Once the two sides started fighting, it was equal to sealing the Frestec Chamber of Commerce's largest market. One of the important reasons why the two empires would go to war with the New Flyer was that they believed that they had almost grasped the lifeline of the New Flyer. Just this point alone was enough to forcefully drag the New Flyer to death. In fact, the result wasn't far from what they expected. Since the beginning of last year, the New Flyer's profits had greatly decreased in just a year. Coupled with the fact that they supported the war, the New Flyer was forced to invest a large amount of money. It was even very likely that they would run a yearly financial deficit for the first time. If this situation continued for a few years or even a decade, then the New Flyer and the countries it supported would inevitably be completely consumed by the two empires. They would no longer be able to resist. Therefore, the key is to end this war as soon as possible. The sooner it ends, the better. Hearing Su Yi's conclusion, the New Flyer executives in the conference room looked at each other in dismay. The chairman made it sound simple, but end it as soon as possible? The two empires were not pushovers. How could they make them admit defeat and end the war so quickly? Although the New Flyer had broken the myth of the invincible archmages and caused the two empires to have no advantage on the battlefield, the two empires were still giants compared to the New Flyer. Even if they worked together with the Lampari Kingdom and the other countries, it would be easier said than done to take them down. Su Yi didn't explain anything to them. He only asked about the final plans of the various departments and branches for the coming year as per usual. After giving some simple suggestions, he announced the adjournment of the meeting. When they left, the executives of the New Flyer all had varying degrees of confusion on their faces. When they couldn't predict the outcome of the war, they naturally couldn't make any more predictions about the future of the New Flyer. This was completely different from the past, where they could clearly see the rapid development of the Chamber of Commerce in the coming year and make plans with greater clarity. It could be said that this was the first time the New Flyer had encountered such a situation since its establishment more than 20 years ago. Of course, the New Flyer had only been established for 20 years, and it had already become a mainstay of a force that could contend with the two empires. This was something that had never happened before in the history of the Signs. If the New Flyer won this war, the New Flyer would become a legend of the Signs. Not only was there no precedent, there would be no precedent in the future. The other high-level executives all left with complicated emotions, but Su Yi didn't stop at all. He came to the training base of the New Flyers Guards that wasn't far from the coast to the northwest of the company's main base. When he entered the base, he saw a magic airship slowly landing. Su Yi took a look and knew that he had come at the right time. The magic airship landed and the door opened. The guard Captain Hart quickly came out and he wasn't surprised that Su Yi was outside. He came in front of Su Yi and gave a salute to Su Yi before saying in a loud voice, "Reporting to Sir Chairman, the guards have successfully completed their mission and have returned safely." Su Yi patted his shoulder with a smile and asked, "How does it feel to fight several archmagi?" Captain Hart's lips twitched, and he had a strange expression. After a while, he replied, "Sir Chairman, to be honest, I don't feel anything. We just set up everything according to the various tests and predetermined plans that we had done before, and then those magisters were dealt with just like that. To be honest, although I saw the whole process with my own eyes, I still feel a little confused. I even wonder if I'm dreaming. You're saying those godlike archmagi were taken care of by us this easily?" Chapter 11:17. It's not like you weren't there when we were doing the test in Marrow City. Su Yi shrugged with a relaxed expression. You've already trapped the two magisters back then. It shouldn't have been hard to kill them. Why do you still look like you can't believe it? After all, we didn't really kill them back then. Captain Hart shook his head, as if he still couldn't accept the fact that the Magisters had fallen in battle with his subordinates. Alright, you'll get used to it in the future. Sui asked again. You should already know about the next mission, right? I received the order on the way here. Captain Hart nodded, the expression on his face becoming even more strange. He couldn't help but ask again, Chairman, didn't you personally release the 2 Magisters from the Canla Empire? Why do you want us to kill them now? I can't help it. Who told the 2 empires to be so disobedient? Sui sighed. If possible, I would also like to let the 2 empires understand that Magisters aren't as useful as they think without harming their relationship. It would be better for everyone to sit down and talk about cooperation and development. Wouldn't that be great? But you've seen it for yourself. Captain Hart immediately laughed bitterly. He'd interacted with Sui many times in this period of time, and knew very well that the chairman didn't have any intention of going to war with the 2 empires. Otherwise, he wouldn't have released the 2 Magisters from the Canla Empire in Marrow City. But reality had proven that the chairman was too naive. The 2 empires had stood on the signs for nearly 1,000 years. How could they set aside their pride and arrogance just because of a single setback and seriously talk about cooperation and development according to the chairman's intentions? Moreover, the fundamental conflict between the 2 empires and the new flyer was the incomparably huge benefits hidden within the magic machine industry. Countless people could see this, and the 2 empires were well aware of it. They naturally hoped to grasp these benefits in their own hands and not be controlled by the new flyer. It could be said that the outbreak of this war was inevitable. The only difference was when. According to the plan, you should set out in 2 weeks. During this period of time, I need you to continue to strengthen your training in attacking magicians. With the previous battle results, I'm sure the other side will have a way to deal with it. That's why you need to become more proficient in this period of time. Only then will you be able to seize the initiative on the battlefield and continue suppressing the archmages. Do you understand what I mean? Sui said again. Understood. Captain Hart nodded vigorously. In fact, in the previous battle, if the other party hadn't been too careless, I'm afraid he wouldn't have fallen into the anti-magic domain so easily. With the agility of archmages, once they react, it won't be so easy to succeed. That's right. This is also a problem that the R&D Center and I have been considering during this period. This time, the guards have returned with first-hand combat data. This information is very important. We can use this information to make adjustments. Hart, you might have to stay with me in the R&D Center for the next few days. What do you think? Can you hold on? Captain Hart laughed heartily and patted his chest hard, making thumping sounds. Sir President, you don't need to worry about my body. But you. It's the first day of the new year. Don't you want to spend more time with Mrs. Steele? Steele went to the Demon Cloud continent with the fleet a week ago. Even if I wanted to accompany her, there was no one to accompany her. Sui helplessly spread out his hands. Captain Hart was stunned. Why did Mrs. Steele suddenly go to the Demon Cloud continent? The dragons over there sent back some feedback related to the illusion film. After Steele learned about it, she decided to go and investigate it in person. In addition to solving these problems, she is also preparing to develop the market on the Demon Cloud continent. Sui shrugged. Speaking of which, I haven't been to the Demon Cloud continent yet. She went there first. Captain Hart looked at Sui with a strange expression. After a while, he said, Sir President, I think you and Mrs. Steele are a match made in heaven. What do you mean? Sui looked at him inexplicably. They're both workaholics, ####. The first half of the year 3803 of the continental calendar was a rare period of peace in the last 2 years. However, this peace was extremely short-lived. On the 16th of January, the army of the Kingdom of Ruhr suddenly invaded the border of the Kandla Empire. After a day of fierce fighting, the border guards of the Kandla Empire were defeated and fled. The army of the Kingdom of Ruhr marched directly into the southwest province of the Kandla Empire. They marched all the way to Marrow City, where they met up with the new flyer guards that had been occupying Marrow City. On the 26th of January, the 8,000 new flyer guards that came as reinforcements broke through the defense line of the Kandla Empire with a large number of military magic machines and successfully arrived at Marrow City. They met up with the army of the Kingdom of Ruhr and the new flyer guards that had stayed behind. The next day, the army of the Kingdom of Ruhr and the new flyer guards in Marrow City, also known as the Lu Xian Army, launched an attack on the Southwest Province Army that had been stationed 5 kilometers away from the city for several months. The Southwest Province Army did not put up any effective resistance and directly chose to surrender. On the 4th of February, the Lu Xian Army that had rested for a while left Marrow City and marched towards the capital of the Southwest Province, Babril City. After receiving the news, the governor's office of the Southwest Province immediately organized the forces of the entire Southwest Province to intercept them. However, a total of 6 battles ended with the Southwest Province Army being defeated. The Lu Xian Army advanced triumphantly and arrived at Babril City on the 13th of February. They engaged in a fierce battle with the Southwest Province Army and the reinforcements sent by the Kandla Empire. Between the two sides, the Rudsun Kingdom's army still had 47,000 Rudsun Kingdom soldiers and 12,000 Frestek Chamber of Commerce guards left after many battles. The Kandra Empire's side had a total of 130,000 soldiers from the Southwest Province's Governor's Manor. The Kandra Empire's army headquarters had a total of 70,000 soldiers from the 3 regiments, as well as a large number of magicians and 5 arch-magi. This was an unprecedented power. This kind of terrifying force was enough to defend against all attacks and even destroy all enemies in the history of the signs. However, after fighting with the Lu Xian army, the Kandla Empire's army was blocked within Babril City by the Lu Xian army. Under the fierce magic cannon fire of the Lu Xian army, they couldn't even come out of the city gate. Contrary to everyone's expectations, the battle did not end quickly. Instead, it lasted for an entire month. During this time, the Kandla Empire's military department kept sending reinforcements to Babril City, mobilizing close to half of the Kandla Empire's army. However, these reinforcements would be ambushed by the Frestek Chamber of Commerce's magic airships and magic tanks on the way, so they couldn't resist and suffered heavy losses. When they finally reached Babril City, most of them had already been defeated. They couldn't increase the defenses of Babril City and even became a burden to it. Conversely, the Kandla Empire had tried to ambush the reinforcements and supplies of the Lu Xian army, but they were quickly defeated by the magic airships that came each time. They couldn't affect the Lu Xian army at all. Moreover, even if the Lu Xian army went deep into the Kandla Empire and their supply lines were stretched, with the fast transport of the new flyers' large transport magic cars, the Lu Xian army's supply lines never had any problems. The Lu Xian army surrounding Babril never ran out of ammunition. They were even able to build a decent camp outside the city in a month's time at a jaw-dropping speed. After a month, the Kandla Empire's army in Babril City finally ran out of supplies and couldn't keep defending. Even if the 5 arch-magi still had battle strength and there were close to 200,000 soldiers in the city, without supplies, not only did they not have the ability to keep fighting, they also lost the courage to keep fighting. In this month, the Kandla Empire's army in the city tried everything to use the 5 arch-magi to fight back against the Lu Xian army, but they didn't succeed a single time. If it wasn't for the death of the 3 arch-magi from the Malar Empire that made the 5 arch-magi pay more attention, they would have already died in the countless battles in the past month. A month later, the the Kandla Empire's army in Babral City launched their final and largest counterattack. After 2 days of intense fighting, the Kandla Empire's army paid a heavy price of 50,000 soldiers, over 100 high-grade magicians, and 6 great magicians before finally breaking out. The 5 arch-magi and the remaining magicians mixed in with the remaining 100,000 Kandla Empire's army and fled the city. At this point, Babral City had finally fallen. As the capital of the southwest province of the Kandla Empire, it was where the governor's office was located. The fall of Babral City meant that the last resistance of the southwest province had dissipated and the southwest province had fallen. In the 1,000 years of history since the establishment of the Kandla Empire, although there had been times when they were invaded by other countries due to the decline of their national strength, there had never been a case where an entire province had fallen into the hands of the enemy. After the news spread, the entire continent was silent. If it was said that the Malar Empire and the Frankish kingdom's army had suffered great losses in the Battle of the Grecius mountain range, as well as the Malar Empire's army's failure to resist the attack of the Frankish kingdom's army on the border of the Malar Empire, as well as the loss of 3 arch-magi, it could be said that the Malar Empire didn't have enough experience. At the same time, it could also be said that the Kandla Empire's defeat was due to a love rival. The southwest province could be said to have resisted with all their strength. The Kandla Empire's army also gave their full support. Not only did they send a large number of reinforcements, they also sent 5 arch-magi as reinforcement. They also mobilized more than half of the Kandla Empire's forces to try and encircle the Frankish kingdom's army. However, the Kandla Empire's side was defeated in the end. Even with the help of the 5 arch-magi, they were unable to resist the attack of the Frankish kingdom's army. In the end, even such an important provincial capital was breached. Such a result was simply the most obvious thing to tell everyone. The new army represented by the new flyer guards was truly unstoppable on the battlefield. Chapter 11-18. 3 magic sedans that looked very luxurious drove through the north gate of Babral City and slowly stopped in front of the fully armed new flyer guard. The back door opened and the Kandla Empire's Commerce Minister Descartes Marquis came out with his group. When they got out, there was a cool breeze that blew onto Descartes Marquis, but it didn't make him feel cold at all, rather there was a bit of warmth in it. Descartes Marquis couldn't help looking up at the sky. He found that the sun was in the sky and the sunlight was bright, but it wasn't dazzling and wasn't hot. It was the best weather for people to enjoy at the beginning of spring. It was already the end of April and it would be May in a few days, so it was natural that there would be this kind of good weather. But with this warm spring breeze, Descartes Marquis didn't feel any warmth in his heart at all. Rather it was like the winter hadn't completely passed and there was still a bit of coldness in his heart. As the commerce minister of the strongest empire on the continent, the Kandla Empire, he had to lead a group of envoys to negotiate with others, so how could he not feel cold in his heart? Descartes Marquis turned to look at the other members of the group and found that they all had unhappy expressions. It could be seen that they were just as unhappy as he was. The powerful Kandla Empire had always forced others to negotiate with them, when had they ever taken the initiative to negotiate with them? After half a month of discussion between the royal family and the Council of Elders, they had finally decided to negotiate with the new flyer. Once it was announced, it created a large stir in the Kandla Empire and created countless voices of opposition. Almost everyone thought that taking the initiative to negotiate was showing weakness, which was simply the greatest shame to the empire. In the history of the Kandla Empire, although they had taken the initiative to negotiate several times, the other party was a large empire like the Mala Empire that was on the same level as the Kandla Empire. So taking the initiative to negotiate because the situation wasn't good wasn't that shameful. Anyway, the Mala Empire had taken the initiative to negotiate with the Kandla Empire more often. But this time, the Kandla Empire had taken the initiative to negotiate with a trivial kingdom of Ruhr. To be more clear, everyone knew that the real target of this peace negotiation was just a small company like the Fresteck Chamber of Commerce. A trivial company taking the initiative to lower their heads. How could the proud Canla people be happy? However, this was the decision of the royal family and the Council of Elders, which meant that taking the initiative to negotiate was the consensus of the high level of the empire. At the same time, this also meant that the high level of the empire had lost confidence in continuing the war with the Kingdom of Ruhr and the New Flyer. As such, they had no choice but to use the method of negotiating to temporarily end the war. Because one of the targets of the negotiation was the New Flyer, objectively speaking, it was just a company. Marquis Descartes, the head of the Canla Empire's Department of Commerce, was sent to be the leader of this diplomatic group and was mainly in charge of this negotiation. It was the first time in the history of the Canla Empire, or even the entire history of the Signs, that an official who mainly dealt with business was in charge of the negotiation. Of course, being forced to this extent by a company's guards was the first time in the history of the Canla Empire and the entire Signs. Marquis Descartes swept his gaze across the fully armed guards wearing the uniform of the New Flyer and sighed inwardly. Even if he knew nothing about military affairs, he could tell from the equipment on these guards that the New Flyer's guards far surpassed the Canla Empire's army. Most of the Canla Empire soldiers were only wearing soft leather armor that couldn't withstand a single blow. The better ones were only wearing half a set of armor, and they were holding primitive swords made of fine iron. Apart from that, they were only equipped with a small wooden shield and nothing more. The New Flyer's guards were wearing bright armor that was definitely made of high-hardness steel that the New Flyer had smelted. They weren't holding traditional weapons like swords either. Instead, they were holding a strange-looking weapon that was said to be able to shoot small but powerful magic bullet. It was said that this weapon, known as the magic rifle, had a shooting range of over 200 meters, even surpassing the vast majority of bows and arrows. This meant that if the soldiers of both sides were to fight, most of the Canla Empire's soldiers would have died before they could even reach the New Flyer's guards. Not to mention that the Fresteck Chamber of Commerce's guards were carrying a large steel pipe, but it was actually a terrifying weapon called the individual magic bazooka. Once this thing was used, the magic rocket's range would reach a shocking 500 meters. Moreover, the might of the magic rocket was incomparably shocking. It could create a giant hole in the ground with a single shot, enough to bury a small army of the Canla Empire. If they were to fight head-on, the Canla Empire's soldiers would first be baptized by these terrifying magic rockets before charging through the dense firepower of the magic rifle. Only then would they have a chance of killing the New Flyer's guards with the traditional swords in their hands. Because the New Flyer's guards were wearing special armor, even if they didn't activate their magic shields, normal swords couldn't pierce through the hard armor at all. Naturally, it was impossible to injure these guards at all. However, what made Descartes, Marquis, and the generals of the army headquarters feel despair was that all of this was based on ignoring the large amount of magic cannons, magic tanks, and the invincible magic airships that the New Flyer's guards had. If these things were included, the Canla Empire's soldiers wouldn't even be able to use the magic rockets and magic rifles of the New Flyer's guards, not to mention charging in front of them to kill them. This kind of thing had already been proven countless times in the previous battles. The generals of the army headquarters were well aware of this, but they couldn't find a good way to solve it. The Emperor was also well aware of this, but he also couldn't do a thing. Before this, the Emperor had tried to strengthen the internal control of the Empire, using a strong military management during special times. He used the advantage of the Canla Empire's resources to slowly wear down the New Flyer. But the New Flyer didn't give the Canla Empire a chance to drag this out at all. No one would have thought that the New Flyer would work with the Kingdom of Ruhr's army to attack the Canla Empire, taking the entire southwest province in just 2 months. Moreover, in these battles, The Kanla Empire's army couldn't stop the New Flyer and the Kingdom of Ruor's army even if they had many powerful arch-magi. Reality proved that the Kanla Empire didn't have the ability to drag this out at all. Therefore, after careful consideration, the Emperor and the Council of Elders had no choice but to take the initiative to seek peace with the New Flyer. To put it bluntly, this was just another delaying tactic. What the Kanla Empire needed was a large amount of time for their military magic machine research to catch up to the New Flyer. Only then would they have the capital to fight the New Flyer on the battlefield. Otherwise, if the New Flyer and the Kingdom of Ruor's army continued to move closer to the Kanla Empire wouldn't be able to stop them. They could only watch as the Kanla Empire's territory slowly devoured and eventually reached Wimbledon City. Whether it was the Emperor or the Council of Elders, they wouldn't allow this to happen, so Descartes Marquis came. The good thing was that after the Kanla Empire proposed peace talks, the Kingdom of Ruor and the New Flyer directly agreed. They didn't reject them as strongly as many people thought. After quickly thinking about all of this, Descartes Marquis took a soft breath and calmed the chill and melancholy in his heart. He had a gentle and reserved smile on his face as he walked over to the welcoming crowd. Descartes Marquis, welcome to Babril City. The person in charge of welcoming them was a foreign affairs official sent by the Kingdom of Ruor and the New Flyer's external manager, young Miss Soli. Seeing Descartes Marquis get out of the magic sedan, the Kingdom of Ruor's foreign affairs official warmly greeted Descartes Marquis before giving the right to lead to young Miss Soli. Whether it was the Kanla Empire or the Kingdom of Ruor, they were both clear that whether it was this war or this peace talk, the main character was the New Flyer. Young Miss Soli, after not seeing you for many years, you're still this beautiful. You're like a flower that has just bloomed, making people sigh in admiration. No matter what Descartes Marquis thought, he still maintained the good demeanor of a noble on the surface. Miss Soria, on the other hand, had a completely different style. She simply nodded at Marquis Descartes and made a gesture of invitation. Descartes Marquis, please come this way. Sir Chairman is waiting for you. Chairman Su is already here? Descartes Marquis' eyes twitched and he couldn't help revealing a look of joy. The main character of this peace talk was the New Flyer, and the main character of the New Flyer was without a doubt their chairman Su-yi. For Su-yi to personally come, it was enough to prove that the New Flyer attached great importance to this peace talk and was very sincere. Chapter 11-19. Su-yi looked at the representative of the Kingdom of Ruor, who was in charge of this negotiation, Count Didamans, the director of the Kingdom of Ruor's Foreign Affairs Department. His gaze was filled with undisguised scrutiny. This time, the Kanla Empire's proposal for peace talks was both within and outside of his expectations. As the war continued, the Kanla Empire suffered crushing defeat after crushing defeat. From these crushing defeats, they realized that the powerful army they were so proud of and the magi they relied on the most were meaningless. As such, they were bound to realize that it would be very difficult for them to win this war. Since this was the case, in order to ensure the integrity of the Kanla Empire's territory and prevent further losses, initiating peace talks was a necessary measure for the Kanla Empire. This was because if the peace talks were successful, it would at least buy a lot of time for the Kanla Empire. What Su-yi didn't expect was that the Kanla Empire would actually recognize the fact that they couldn't compete with the New Flyer on the battlefield so early. As such, they proposed peace talks much earlier than Su-yi expected. This was enough to prove that the Kanla Empire wasn't just a bunch of people who lived in tradition and still had the mentality of "I'm number one in the world." There were many people who could clearly see the situation clearly. This was why Su-yi personally represented the New Flyer in this negotiation. If the Kanla Empire could truly see the situation clearly and come up with a plan that satisfied Su-yi, then he wouldn't mind negotiating for peace. In the end, the Kandla Empire was one of the two great empires on this continent. With the strength of the new flyer, even if they cooperated with the other empires, it was basically impossible for them to swallow the entire Kandla Empire. Sui also didn't wish to see the Kandla Empire being riddled with holes and in a complete mess through war. In the history of Earth, there had actually been a similar situation. The ancient Mongol army had the ability to be completely invincible on the battlefield. This allowed them to ride on warhorses and sweep across the Eurasian continent, establishing an incomparably huge empire that covered almost the entire Eurasian continent. However, such an empire was only nominally occupied. In reality, the Mongol Empire's control over its own territory was extremely weak. It didn't last long before it was completely divided and gradually died out. New Flyer now relied on countless military magic machines that were countless times more advanced and had invincible fighting strength on the battlefield. If Sui was willing, he could actually let the New Flyer's cooperation with the other empires and invincible in the signs. However, this was meaningless. Suyi's dream was to create a complete magic machine industry system on the Signs continent. Then he would use this system to greatly increase the productivity and production level of the continent, improving the civilization of the continent and improving the lives of everyone. War was only a means, not an end. The reason why there was a war with the traditional powers represented by the two empires was because the two empires wanted to snatch the leadership of the magic industry from New Flyer and the huge benefits it contained. Sui didn't care about these benefits, but Sui wouldn't allow the leadership to fall into the hands of others. Apart from himself, Sui didn't believe that there was another person on the continent who had the same knowledge and experience in building a magic industry. If this peace talk is successful, we will certainly compensate your country. I believe that you will be satisfied. At this time, Marquis Descartes had finished the preliminary negotiations with Count Didymans and turned to look at Sui. Chairman Su, what is the opinion of New Flyer? Sui smiled. The peace talk was initiated by the Kandla Empire, so of course you should be the one to propose the conditions first. Chairman Su is right. Marquis Descartes nodded and raised his hand to make a gesture. Two people walked out from the diplomatic group of the Kandla Empire behind him and came in front of Sui and Count Didymans. They took out two documents and handed them to each of them. This is the preliminary peace talk agreement drafted by the Empire's Council of Elders. Please take a look. Sui and Count Didymans looked at each other and reached out to take the document. They opened it and read it carefully, then frowned slightly. In this peace talk agreement, the Kandla Empire proposed that after the two sides agreed to a truce, the Kingdom of Ruhr and New Flyer would withdraw from the Kandla Empire's territory, and the Kandla Empire would not pursue the losses they caused to the Kandla Empire in this war. This was normal, after all, this was the basis of the truce between the two sides. However, in this agreement, the Kandla Empire's words still had a hint of arrogance, which made people uncomfortable. Of course, the tone and words were not important. What was important was the conditions, and in the terms of the truce proposed by the Kandla Empire stated that after the truce, the Kandla Empire would be fully open to the Kingdom of Ruhr and New Flyer, and would provide a series of preferential policies. The opening to the Kingdom of Ruhr was mainly to remove the long-standing hostile policy between the two sides on the border, allowing the Kingdom of Ruhr's civilians and merchants to freely enter the Kandla Empire. At the same time, they would be given special treatment that was second only to the Kandla Empire's civilians. At the same time, the Kandla Empire would also withdraw the troops that were originally hoarded on the border between the two sides. They would also select 10 cities on the border as cities for in-depth cooperation between the two sides. The Kingdom of Ruhr's citizens would not have to pay taxes when entering these 10 cities. In short, this series of conditions revolved around the preferential policies that the Kandla Empire would give to the Kingdom of Ruhr. Although it seemed good, there was not much to it. The Kanla Empire would not invest too little manpower and resources in this. In fact, these conditions even had a hint of charity. In comparison, the conditions that the Kanla Empire gave to the new flyer were much better. The Kanla Empire promised that after the truce between the two sides, the Kanla Empire would give the new flyer the same treatment as the Kanla Empire's internal chamber of commerce. In other words, any products of the new flyer that entered the Kanla Empire would not have to pay taxes. They would only have to pay the same tax as the Kanla Empire's Chamber of Commerce. At the same time, the new flyer would be protected by the Kanla Empire's laws. If there were any disputes or accidents, the Kanla Empire would provide all kinds of support to the new flyer. In addition, the Kanla Empire also promised to further cooperate with the new flyer, guaranteeing that any cooperation with the new flyer would receive the highest priority from the Kanla Empire and enjoy all kinds of benefits and privileges. At first glance, these conditions were very tempting. This was because for a chamber of commerce like the new flyer, it could be said to be extremely convenient. Just the removal of taxes would allow the new flyer's imports from the Kanla Empire to increase by leaps and bounds, resulting in even more shocking profit. If any other normal chamber of commerce received these conditions, they would undoubtedly be deeply grateful and honored to the Kanla Empire. However, when Sui saw these conditions, he couldn't help but let out a cold laugh. Descartes Marquis, are these all the conditions that the Kanla Empire has proposed? Sui raised the peace agreement in his hand and asked Descartes Marquis. Descartes Marquis smiled and replied, "This is only a preliminary agreement. If Chairman Su is dissatisfied in any way, we can discuss further." "I'm not dissatisfied in any way." Sui shook his head and lightly tossed the peace agreement in his hand. The agreement flew back, as if it had grown wings, and landed on the table in front of Descartes Marquis with a thump. Sui then raised his voice slightly and continued with a serious expression, "I'm not satisfied with this entire agreement. Descartes Marquis, if the Kanla Empire wishes to negotiate with such an attitude, then please go back. We'll meet on the battlefield." Descartes Marquis glanced at the agreement on the table. There was no trace of panic on his face. After a moment of silence, he continued with a smile, "Chairman Su, peace talks are meant to be discussed slowly. If you're not satisfied with the conditions, we can make new ones. Or you can just state the conditions that new flyer wants, and we'll adjust according to the situation. What do you think?" Sui glanced at him, then stood up and left the meeting room. The other members of New Flyer present didn't hesitate in the slightest and followed Sui out. Descartes Marquis and all the members of the Kanla Empire's diplomatic corps were immediately stunned. They never would have thought that Sui would have such a bad temper and leave on the spot. This was completely different from the various negotiations they had in mind. If you're not satisfied with the conditions, then Descartes Marquis had already said that they could negotiate slowly. But you didn't say anything and just left. What's going on? Descartes Marquis was stunned for a while, then he turned to Count Didymans and asked, "Sir Count, isn't Chairman Su a bit unreasonable? Since you've already agreed to negotiate with us, isn't it a bit too much to put on such an attitude?" Count Didymans, on the other hand, had a relaxed smile on his face. He glanced at Marquis Descartes and slowly took a sip of his wine. Then he slowly said, "Marquis Descartes, do you still not understand? This is the peace talk that your Kanla Empire proposed. But you put forward such conditions that are like trying to coax a child. Don't you think it's ridiculous? You said that Chairman Su's attitude wasn't good, then I'd like to ask you, is your attitude good enough?" Descartes Marquis' face darkened. "I've already said that if you're not satisfied with the conditions, we can negotiate in detail. The so-called negotiation is to find a result that everyone is satisfied with, isn't it?" Count Didymans chuckled and shook his head. He put the teacup in his hand on the table, got up and slowly walked out of the room. The other members of the Kingdom of Ruhr in the room also left. In the blink of an eye, only the members of the Canla Empire's diplomatic corps were left in the large meeting room. Even the servants who were in charge of serving tea and water had left. Descartes Marquis and the other members of the diplomatic corps looked at each other, speechless for a while. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.